Welcome and thank you for joining today's Regional Issues Forum. Please note that all audience audio connections will be muted until the Q&A portion of the call. Feel free to place yourself in the question queue by utilizing the Raise Hand feature located at the bottom right of your screen. If you are on a mobile device, tap your screen to display the toolbar, then press Raise Hand. You will be unmuted when it is your turn. Please accept the unmute message to become unmuted. If you are on the phone, please press #2 to enter the question queue, and we will address questions when we pause for Q&A. Please open your chat panel by using the associated icon located at the bottom of your screen, and if you need technical assistance, please send a chat and address the event services host. With that, I'll turn the call over to Vijay. Please go ahead.
Hello, thank you. Thank you, Marvin, and welcome everybody to the, if I'm correct in my memory, our third public Regional Issues Forum meeting. Welcome everybody, and I hope you've had a good summer or the end of the summer, and advance happy Labor Day. With me, I have my colleague and partner in crime, Josh Walter, the Vice Chair of the Regional Issues Forum. And we have a pretty good agenda today planned, and credit to that goes to CalISO staff in supporting and enabling the RIF liaisons who have come up with this agenda. I want to also first give a big thank you in advance to all the guest speakers who've been invited either from CalISO staff or by my colleagues in the RIF liaison team and who'll be speaking later. Before we go into the agenda and discuss it, I would like to do a round of introductions quickly. First, of the RIF liaisons, if you could all chime in, introduce yourself, of course, your affiliation with the entity you are part of, and your sector representation with the RIF. And so I'll give it to Josh, please, and I'll go at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Vijay. This is Josh Walter with Seattle City Light. I am one of two of the EIM entity sector liaisons. And then, Vijay, are you planning on doing a kind of a roll call type?
Yes.
Okay, great.
It's an informal roll call. Yes, please. So why don't we go in the form of, why don't I just speak up the sector list, and then appropriate representations can speak up. So from the WEIM entities, thank you, Josh. Lindsay from Nevada Energy has conveyed her regrets, so she won't be available today, but she has notified me of her unfortunate conflict. Let's go next to the ISO PTOs, the participating transmission owners, please.
Yeah, this is Matt LaCar with Pacific Gas and Electric, PTO sector.
Good afternoon, Vijay and everyone. Meg McNall with Thompson Coburn. I represent the 6 cities, and I am also representing the PTO sector.
Awesome, thank you. Let's go next to the consumer-owned utilities that are located within an EIM balancing authority.
Hi, this is Doug Bocignone. I'm with Flint Resource Consultants, and I'm one of the consumer-owned utility representatives.
Thank you, Doug. Do we have Lauren? I think Lauren may be joining late, and I know why. There's another competing conflict with a greenhouse gas industry forum happening. Let's go to the independent power producers and marketers, please.
Hello, Ian White with Shell Energy North America. I represent the IPP and marketer community sector of the RIF.
Good to see you, Ian. Do we have Kathleen? Okay, maybe Kathleen will join soon. Let's go to our Federal Power Marketing administrators.
Hi, Vijay. This is Alex Spain. Can you hear me?
Yes. Welcome.
Okay, great. Thank you. This is Alex Spain. I'm with the PMA. I'm the PMA sector liaison. I am the trading floor manager with the Bonneville Power Administration.
Thank you, Alex. And then we'll get back to the last one, which is the Public Interest and Consumer Advocate Group of the sector. Jamie, do you want to please?
Hello, I'm Jamie Stamson. I'm with the Montana Consumer Council, and I'm one of the two public interest organization consumer advocate sector reps.
Thanks, Jamie. And For those who may not know, I represent Vijay. I represent the public interest sector, the PIO, part of the PIO consumer advocate representation in the RIF. Thank you all again, and thanks for the introductions, everybody. Let's go to our guest speakers, whoever's on the call. Let's go to CalISO team first. Everybody from CalISO, if you don't mind kindly introducing yourselves, and then anybody else who's part of the agenda and as a guest speaker, please.
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Stacy Crowley, the Vice President of External Affairs at the ISO. Thanks for having me today.
Thank you, Stacy.
And Vijay, this is Holly Taylor. Vijay, this is Holly Taylor, Manager of Regional Affairs for the California ISO. Thank you.
Thank you, Holly. Anybody else?
And Emily Hughes, the Regional Affairs Analyst supporting the Regional Issues Forum.
Thank you. Chris, please go ahead.
Hi, Chris Bossard, real-time ops shift manager.
Thank you. Welcome to the RIF, Danny.
Danny Johnson, Market Infrastructure Policy.
That's great. Anybody else from CalISO? I think, of course, our other guest speaker will introduce you later. So, Jillian, if that's okay, we'll hold off on that. Anybody else on the agenda and or from CalISO, please? Okay, well, this is great. Welcome again. I think you all should have seen on the website, and if not, can we go to the next slide, please? There should be an agenda on the screen. I thought we had. Yes, thank you. So for today's agenda, which is a consensus-driven effort, so for all who are attending and are new to the RIF, the Regional Issues Forum is a deliberative body that operates by consensus, and we have been empowered with deliberating even active current stakeholder trending issues, which led to the selection of these two topics. I credit Kathleen, especially Matt Lekar and Josh, for coming up with the stress conditions topic, and Josh will help take that up after the break. We don't have a time breakdown right in this agenda, but I want to also take a minute to thank Holly Taylor and Emily Hughes, who've done human work with helping facilitate and set these meetings up and helping with the agenda. Before I forget and get to Stacy Crowley, one last quick announcement I want to make, and I'll bring it up later at the end of the meeting, is our next RIF meeting will be on November 8th, right before the CalISO Symposium. And CalISO staff has done a phenomenal effort to get us a meeting space at the convention center, right at the Sacramento Convention Center, and the registration is all up on the website. For those who are interested, please go to the EIM RIF, Regional Issues Forum website, and you will see the link to register. I'm repeating this, I will repeat again at the end, but for those who may drop off later, this is just more of a public announcement. Having said that, thank you all for introductions. Let's get this show on the road, and I wanted to thank Stacy for coming on and presenting some opening thoughts, and then we'll go to some business matters, and we'll move on. Thank you.
Thank you, Vijay. Again, Stacy Crowley, Vice President of External Affairs, and I appreciate just taking a couple of minutes to provide opening remarks, and appreciate you all getting together today. Now, there's a lot going on in the West on a variety of fronts, including the weather. And so your second topic today about stress conditions is certainly timely and appropriate this week. And we've got, I think the entire West is keeping an eye on and working hard to make sure we're coordinated and we have plans in place for this heat event. And appreciate all the RIF liaisons, their work, and for them being on the phone today, all of the prep that it takes to get to these meetings. Much appreciated, and I think that we're excited to see you all explore the evolution of this forum and make sure that it's something that you all find valuable and get the information that you need. The first topic that you have today on the resource, the annual roadmap process, is one that you are all going to want to be familiar with if you aren't already, and really comfortable navigating this process, right? We certainly look forward to your input and engagement along the way as we develop the priorities for the policy initiatives. There's opportunity, of course, to submit comments, and I know Jillian will talk about this in much more detail. And we also look forward to any enhanced role that you might have in that process as the Governance Review Committee considers all aspects of really stakeholder engagement as they look to governance proposal changes for EDAM. I really just wanted to say welcome and thank you, and I know that there'll be a great opportunity to connect and network at the November 8th meeting that Vijay mentioned, and I certainly know that Rob Konziolka and Elliot are happy to provide remarks there as well. And I wanted to let you know that we are here as a resource, right? You run your own meetings, you have your own agendas and processes. We're just here to help in any way we can. Certainly reach out to me or anybody on my team as you go through thinking about agendas and other things. We want to be able to provide you with any resources, both sort of administrative tasks as well as sort of subject matter issue experts and things that you need to make sure that your work is being done timely and effectively. So that's really all I wanted to say. Thank you again for including me. I hope the discussion goes well today. Everybody stay cool and do what you can to conserve. We're certainly here in California having a flex alert called this afternoon from 4 to 9 p.m. I know other balancing authorities are experiencing very hot temperatures as well. So keep an eye on that and hope everybody stays safe. So thanks, Vijay.
Stacey, thank you. When I requested Holly 2 months ago that the RIF liaisons would like a little bit of presence and connection with the CalISO leadership, Holly stepped up right away and offered if you could be available. So thank you for giving time, and I am very sure you have a lot on your plate. So thanks for coming. And real quick, RIF liaisons, any burning relevant policy stakeholder related questions for Stacey? It's got to be a deal breaker question. I'm kidding.
I don't mind tough questions.
No, that's okay. I think if anybody has any questions, I'm sure we can follow up with you through Holly. Thank you all, and thanks to Stacey for being available. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Before we move on to the next, actually, we'll get back to the RIF business a little bit now. I want to first take a minute to thank Emily Hughes. Emily has been, for many of you who know, helping last year after Nikki Imam left, stepped into the role and was helping with setting up the meetings, tolerating our many emails that go back and forth, the doodle polls. There's a lot that happens in the green room for the show to go well. And I want to thank Emily Hughes for all her work and also helping transition with Holly when Holly joined CalISO. Emily is moving on in a new role and will be leaving this engagement. And she has 100% committed to stepping in last minute and help us out, even in a new job. I'm kidding, if we have a crisis. But I want to let everybody take a minute if you have anything specific to say. But on behalf of the RIF liaisons, thank you, Emily, for all your work and supporting us. Okay, two other matters of RIF business. One is that one of the comments that we had talked about was the RIF worksheet of the priorities that I think we all as sectors have agreed upon, and we're doing a pretty good job matching up to it in terms of what we agreed are collective issues of interest for the RIF to work on. And like today's agenda topic is reflective of one of those 5 or 6 priorities. I want to just make an open request to all attendees on this call. If you are unaware of the RIF worksheet, it should be on our website. If not, it will be in the next week or 2. But please reach out to the appropriate sector that you feel you align with. And there on the website, the link that I have requested has been sent in the chat box. You will see a sector liaisons for those who are new to the RIF, and reach out to them so you can know more about what the RIF does, how you wish to engage, and also if you have any public comments to make, you should be able to make at the end of this call. Since we are not a very formal body that operates like quorum and have structured voting, I want to clarify that if you do not see an agenda item called public comments, it doesn't mean we are not factoring it. We are welcoming public comments as it goes with the agenda topics. I hope that's helpful for everybody to know. Great. And then any other questions on the agenda, please, before we fully move into it, please. Okay, great.
Just a reminder that if you have a question,
sure,
you can use the raise hand icon at the bottom of the screen, or if you dialed in via phone, you can use #2 on your telephone keypad.
Yeah, Marvin, I have no visibility, so I'm trusting you helping us. Was there a hand raised?
We currently have no hands raised.
Okay, great. Okay, let's move into the agenda item. I want to invite, I'm already forgetting again, but Jillian Spidler from CalISO. Jillian, I hope I really didn't get this wrong, but welcome to the CalISO EIM, Western EIM Regional Issues Forum. I do not know if you've presented to this group before, but I'm sure you have interacted with some of the RIF liaisons in different ways. Just as context for everybody on this call, the policy roadmap is a stakeholder effort, an initiative, and also a mechanism or a tool that the CalISO uses to track, manage, and communicate their different work policy proposals, initiatives underway. If for those who attended the May meeting in San Diego, right after the WEIM meeting, we had Ann McKenna come and speak to the policy roadmap and the efforts that were underway in improvising it. I think here we have a follow-up from Jillian speaking to it. And this was also, if I remember correctly, a request from the independent power producer sector for a conversation on the policy initiatives roadmap. So having said that, I welcome Jillian and I give it to you, please.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me here today. And thank you, more importantly, I think, for your interest in the stakeholder initiatives catalog and roadmap processes. We appreciate that. Just for context, again, my name is Jillian Spidler. I'm with a relatively new and very small group within policy called Policy Integration and Governance. And one of our core responsibilities is to coordinate across policy initiatives, and the catalog and roadmap processes are both important as inputs to and output from those efforts. So this is something that we put a lot of thought and effort into, and I'm happy to share with you today. So just a quick note, baseline for those who have not spent time participating in the catalog and roadmap processes. They're two very different animals. The former is an exhaustive list of initiatives we're currently working on, we've just completed, or we have on our radar. And whereas the latter, the roadmap, is really a very specific near-term plan. They're different animals, but the catalog really informs the roadmap process. And so I want to walk through those two one after the other. So if we could go to the next slide, that would be great. Thank you. All right, again, the Stakeholder Initiatives Catalog is very full inventory of initiatives. It includes everything that's been submitted by all the stakeholder initiatives, policy initiatives submitted by stakeholders, including those submitted by ISO staff. And the Stakeholder Initiative Catalog, actually, every time we update it, we really include initiatives that we decided not to incorporate within the catalog. We'll just sort of walk through that. And I will provide some more color on that in just a moment. We have, you'll see things in the catalog broken out as discretionary and non-discretionary. And I know that might sound a little bit nebulous, so I want to take just a moment to say that when we talk about non-discretionary items, we're really talking about policy initiatives that are that really impact, that are needed to maintain system reliability, efficient and reliable market function. But I think foremost is really regulatory requirements, things that we're required to do by Ferc order, due to NERC requirements, to comply with new legislation. So those are really the ones, those are the core non-discretionary items. Let's see. Okay, we can go on to the next slide, where I have a few more notes on the catalog process. So I mentioned that that some things were excluded from the catalog, Policy initiatives in the catalog process are typically those that entail a tariff change. They're not administrative or software changes. I put simply there, and then as I look at it, I think, administrative and software changes are not simple. It's not that those are items that we dismiss as important. It's simply a matter of, those we have to find a different home. The catalog process is really devoted to policy initiatives, again, that implicate tariff changes. One thing that I want to underscore, and I will come back to, is that stakeholder submissions to the catalog are welcome and appreciated all year round. You will see twice a year from us, typically, a market notice. We aim for January and July for a deadline for stakeholder submissions, potential policy issues. But that doesn't mean they're not welcome all year round. It just means that we're getting ready to update the catalog, so we need a little bit of a line in the sand so we don't have too many moving pieces all at once. I want to just say we really appreciate those submissions, and we appreciate the staggered submissions throughout the year. When we get those submissions in from stakeholders, it can be a great deal of work. We really dig into those. We try to absorb the issue. We go back and read background information associated with that submission, so maybe city tickets or things that came through the BPM change management process. We try to talk to the subject matter experts within the ISO, technology, settlements, definitely consult with legal to see if it's something that would require a tariff change. So quite a bit of work goes into combing through those submissions, and you might find that we call you back for additional information to really help us do a good job when we evaluate those. Also, sometimes the catalog is a pretty big document, and there's a lot of technical and deep material there. Sometimes we find that a submission has already been added, or it's sort of intrinsic to some initiative that's already in the catalog. So we definitely comb through those and appreciate them and spend a lot of time with them. I wanted to draw that out because it maybe is not necessarily transparent that we're doing all that work behind the scenes. But again, that's going on for sure. Let's see. So then from there, the catalog really helps to inform the roadmap process. At this point, and I'll talk more about sort of the logistics of the catalog process, but once we get the submissions, we've updated the catalog, we've gotten comments on the catalog, we move forward from there to develop the policy initiatives roadmap. Okay, so let's go to the next slide, which really just lays out all those things I just said, but much prettier. This is our target timeline for updating the catalog and the roadmap. As I mentioned, we have submissions deadlines, that sort of line in the sand in January and July that we aim for. But again, as noted in bold there, catalog submissions are welcome and all year round. I would just point out, I can't highlight the screen, but it's down there to the bottom left around 7 o'clock. You can see that the catalog is updated and there's a comment period ongoing. Thank you for that. And that is where we are now. I should put a little "you are here" star or something. I wanted to note briefly for anybody who is involved in this process or wants to get involved that we have changed the comment due date on the updated catalog. The comments were due on 9/12, and it was pointed out to us, and we really appreciate that we had a bunch of comments due all within a very short time frame. And so we've moved that out based on that feedback to September 23rd. And I believe a market notice went out yesterday or will go out today to update you on those comment due dates. But just make a mental note to yourself that those comments are not due until 9/23. Hopefully that takes a little bit of the pressure off. Again, thank you for that feedback. And I think it's reflective of how much we all have on our plates. But that was a good reality check. So let's see. We can go on now to the next slide and really talk through roadmap process, right? So the sort of the second phase, we've got our detailed catalog, and now we're ready to take that information and lay it out as a high-level work plan.
Jillian,
on an annual basis.
Sorry.
Please.
I should have asked you at the beginning if you want to take questions along the way or at the end, but do you mind taking a couple of quick questions of stuff you've covered already yet?
Oh, absolutely. That's fine.
Okay. Can we go back to your last slide, please? And then I want to bring up the RIF liaisons. I'm paging you all. Does anybody have any questions, please, right off the bat immediately of stuff until now? I have one question, but I want to first let my colleagues chime in if they have questions.
And again, if you do have a question, feel free to raise your hand, and I'll make sure to unmute you. You can use the raise hand function in Zoom, or if you dialed in, you can use #2 on your telephone keypad. And it looks like we have no questions at this time.
Okay, I have one quick question. I think it was slide number 3, right at the beginning. Marvin, I think, Jillian, you talked something about non-discretionary items. If we go one more back, right here, the Stakeholder Initiative the Stakeholder Initiative catalog captures all these items. Can you clarify with a easy example what you meant by non-discretionary initiatives? I mean, you have these examples below, but the definition of non-discretionary.
Right. So non-discretionary items are things that are absolutely required for system reliability. They often are driven by FERC orders.
Okay.
So I'm under the pressure of the question, I hesitate to start, enumerating things, but I would say, an easy example that I was going to mention later on is that it is the Washington Cap and Invest support initiative, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's something that we need to do to support our, stakeholders, given that regulatory framework. So that would be an example of one that we just can't defer. It's in lockstep with some regulation or requirement from that.
Okay, thank you for that quick explanation. I think, Kathleen, you have your hand raised.
Sure. Yeah, I'm going to let you go first, Vijay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jillian. I really appreciate you joining us and giving this presentation, and happy to see you back at the CAISO. I was wondering if we could, just before we move on to the roadmap, if you could talk a little bit about the catalog itself, and especially the discretionary section that has a lot of different initiatives or effort, or let's say issues in it that have been around for a long time. Things get added. It's a living document, but it also, we look at it once a year, give or take, but it's not very easy to provide comments on that section, if that makes sense. Like, how do we as stakeholders provide helpful feedback to the CAISO on, let's say there's several of them that are EIM related, but from years ago might have been introduced. So how do we give helpful feedback to you on if this is still an issue for us, if this is something that maybe the issue needs to be tweaked? Does that question make sense? How do we better help you guys?
No, that is a fantastic question. I'm glad that you drew that out. Thank you, Kathleen. Well, again, the comments due date is September 23rd, and what would be fantastic, in particular for those initiatives, and we certainly, there's more in that catalog than we could possibly ever undertake, right? But if there are issues that are of importance to a subset of RIF members or the RIF community as a whole, that carries a lot of weight. We'd love to know that. We'd love to get individual comments or joint comments from the whole group to help draw out why it's important to you, and that helps us, prioritize it correctly according to that importance.
That's helpful. I'm wondering if you mentioned comments, and I kind of wondered if you had a preferred method of communication, and not to get too technical, but when a stakeholder submits comments, it's from that organization, but you said the RIF. And so if you're envisioning like comments from the RIF sectors or the RIF as all the sectors, how would you like to receive those kinds of comments?
Honestly, however you would like to give them. If you want to write them up together and just submit them to the stakeholder comments, the usual email address conduit, I think that would be the most straightforward way. We don't have a comment template built into the stakeholder commenting tool, and so just to be very mechanical about it, but would absolutely welcome your comments, and if you submit them in through that normal stakeholder comments email address, they will come straight to me.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you, Jillian. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you. If there's no other questions, Jillian, we'll give back to you. And Marvin, I'll appreciate your help bringing it back to where we were. Thank you.
Okay, so actually, if we could, let's see, I have my slides numbered differently, for which I apologize. If we could just go forward to the next, oh no, wait, I'm sorry. You were absolutely right. We can go back that one to the roadmap, first roadmap slide and walk through that. Okay, so where we left off was, remember the "you are here" star that I should have put on that cute graphic on the previous slide. We're getting ready to accept comments from you all on September 23rd. And following that, we will incorporate those comments into the catalog and repost the final catalog. And at that point, we really are continuing the work to shore up, revise, and develop the roadmap for the upcoming 3 years. Now, the roadmap is primarily focused on just what we plan to undertake over the next 3 years. It also includes a very detailed breakdown for the upcoming year. I'm going to show you an example in a minute from the prior year's roadmap, but you'll see that the roadmap really captures the policy development, not explicitly, but it includes, tariff development, business requirements, BPM changes, et cetera. It shows targeted implementation timelines that we plan to undertake over the next 3 years. And then again, it's broken down in more detail for the upcoming year. So in this case, this fall, we'll be developing the roadmap for 2023, 4, and 5, and a detailed plan for 2023. Let's see. Let's go to the next slide, and then I'll pause for questions. I want to just put a few more points across on the roadmap itself. Again, the roadmap, it encompasses a lot. I'm going to show you an example. If you haven't looked at it before, it can be pretty daunting to look at. But there's a lot embedded in it. So you'll see the policy development. You'll see, embedded in there is, again, as I said, legal input, tariff changes. In the meantime, everything going on in the background, right? Development of detailed business requirements, BPM changes. And it really is informed by implementation considerations, including ISO staff bandwidth, stakeholder bandwidth, our vendors that work on the software. We try to take input, especially from on the roadmap, the draft roadmap that we'll publish later this year, on what hurdles this presents for stakeholders. We don't always have perfect insight into that, but we recognize that there's a lot on your plate and that there are changes that you have to absorb and implement on your end. Ferc Timeline. We've got to be able to file these things, get an order back from Ferc, and that's another moving piece that is important. So the roadmap is really informed by a lot. Not all of these pieces are explicitly represented, as I mentioned, but they're all underlying it, and I think that that's something that's important to keep in mind as you look at it and as you try to parse through it. And with that, I guess this is probably a good place to pause for questions, if anybody has any.
RIF liaisons, do any of you please have any questions? This is our one chance to ask questions and learn about the process in terms of how this integrates with your organizational or sector needs and giving appropriate engagement. So let's not lose Jillian while we have her. We'll go to Kathleen again, and then I hope the others may think of other questions you may have. Thank you.
Sure, I'll get us started. And I think the lens by which we're asking these questions is trying to figure out how the RIF can provide more value to you. So really think about it from that perspective. So if we're thinking about the roadmap, the catalog makes sense. We can provide some feedback on like really mechanical things like, are these still issues? Are these not issues? Or what are the issues that are important? But I think that prioritization is really complicated, Jillian, because it's balancing so many things like you've laid out here. And a lot of them are not discretionary, not very movable. Do you think it's clear enough for stakeholders where the wiggle room is to provide the right kind of feedback to try to prioritize issues to us that are important that maybe aren't showing up as near term, midterm? Like, how would you give guidance to us as to what kind of roadmap feedback is really even actionable?
Yeah, I think you bring up a great point, Kathleen, and of course you've been on the other side of this, so you know that the roadmap really represents pretty much everybody going full tilt. There isn't a whole lot of wiggle room, and I want to be candid about that. That said, the more that we understand the high priority items and the reason why they're high priority and the dependencies that you have that make a particular initiative that may not make it to the road, may not have made it into the draft roadmap, the more information we can get on that, the more that helps us figure out, do we need to make more room on the plate? Is there something on here that can be deferred? Can key elements of this be included somewhere else that's appropriate? So just those insights can, at the draft roadmap process point, which will be this fall again, and I'll talk about that timeline a little bit more too. There are a lot of moving pieces here, so I apologize for that, deferring that for a minute. But you know, that kind of insight is so much appreciated. But like you said, a lot of this stuff is non-discretionary. The roadmap really does represent everybody going full tilt, including stakeholders. So it's kind of a tightly put together puzzle, but that doesn't mean that, you know, that if the puzzle pieces need to change, that we're not open to that. We just need to really, you know, understand that. And that's why I was so thrilled to be included on today's agenda and make sure that this is, I appreciate everybody's interest in this and getting to communicate those comment deadlines and sort of how the process works overall and what we endeavor to do with that feedback. It's really great. So thank you again to the RIF group for reaching out.
Thank you, Jillian. And I should thank Kathleen first. This is Kathleen's favorite topic, if I remember. Kathleen's been keen to have the roadmap be discussed.
There's so many favorite topics, Vijay. How can you pick?
I know, but all the liaisons were curious about this, so I'm glad you could be here. Any other questions from anybody else? If beyond the RIF liaisons, anybody attending on the call, Marvin, please let us know.
Okay, just as a quick reminder, you can use the raise hand icon if you entered through Zoom, or if you used your phone for audio, you can press #2 on your telephone keypad. Looks like we have a couple here. I'll go ahead and unmute our first question.
Hey, Jillian, this is Dan Williams from Customized Energy Solutions. Thanks for being here to do the presentation today. I may just be forgetting if this already happens, but within the non-discretionary items, does the CAISO produce during the draft roadmap process sort of a short list of items that are maybe on the bubble that then stakeholders or the RIF could help in prioritizing? You know, what I'm thinking is if you have, you know, $10 left to spend and you've got $15 worth of initiatives, can the stakeholders and the RIF help influence where those dollars get allocated once the CAISO's already narrowed it down from the fact that there's, you know, $1,000 worth of requests out there in the entire catalog.
I think that's probably about the right order of magnitude, maybe, but except for you know, as I mentioned to Kathleen, the roadmap ultimately tends to really represent a full plate, and I say that a little cautiously. You know, I feel like the roadmap, when we put it out, the draft roadmap, it really is sort of, you know, everybody's going at, you know, at 100%. But things always come up within the year, and we almost should save, as you point out, that little sort of $10 range. And it's often not about dollars; it's often about people. That, you know, that for initiatives that come up within the year that weren't anticipated when the roadmap process was first put out at the end of the prior year. But that's as an aside. I think that's exactly right. We do not put together a you know, almost made the cut kind of list, but I think that if your comments can draw out the importance of an initiative, or more than one initiative, at the stakeholder comment phase of the catalog, that really helps us kind of put that on our radar as, where can we fit this in? How can we fit this in? Can we fit it in a year out? Can we move, like I mentioned earlier, can we attach this to something else? Can it be staggered in? How can we accommodate this? But understanding the importance of it to the RIF entities and the RIF sectors individually really helps us kind of keep it on that rate. We don't have a formal list, but that's exactly what we are trying to get out of the catalog comments, as well as the comments on the draft roadmap, the first cut at it that we publish in the fall.
Thanks. I appreciate that feedback, and I think you could probably tell where I'm going on this. Is just to help, you know, stakeholders really narrow in, and then help the CAISO get good feedback on both the content and the sequencing. You know, if there's only so much that can get done in 2023, is it best to prioritize something that's energy storage focused, something that's transmission focused, you know, those sorts of things, and letting entities know that CAISO is grappling with whether to take on initiative A and B versus C and D, and have the stakeholders be able to have some informed feedback to narrow things down, and let the CAISO know that maybe they can wait a year for, you know, E and F, but they really want to work on B and C in the next cycle. So I'll just leave it there as a bit of a comment, and appreciate again you being here today.
Thank you, Dan. No, I appreciate you drawing that out. Also, that's insightful. I know you've been involved in the catalog and roadmap processes, watching that for a long time. But again, the more we can get and understand, the more we can get in terms of feedback to really help us understand the importance of various things to you as a community, the better that helps us be able to prioritize those and hopefully get them done. Okay, well, with that, I wanted to just, at the risk of being a little overwhelming, I wanted to kind of jet through the last year's policy initiatives roadmap, just to sort of show you what it looks like if you're not already familiar, and give you just some thoughts on that for consideration. So if we could go ahead and go to the next slide. Some graphics break things down and make them simpler. Some really attempt to capture a lot. I'm afraid this is in the latter category. Feedback on this presentation of the material here in the roadmap is welcome as well. If there's a different, a better additional way to display this information that is immediately clear to you, I've grappled with that because I feel like this can be a bit hard to digest. But I would love that feedback from you following this meeting, and I just thought I would throw that out there because as I was putting together this presentation, I realized, wow, this is an awful lot. I'm accustomed to looking at it, but if it's not something that you work in and work with quite a bit, then it can be daunting. Let's see. I think I've pretty much covered everything I wanted to cover, but I wanted to just underscore a couple other things while I've got this open. And that said, things do change over the course of the year. I mentioned earlier, Vijay had the question about what is a non-discretionary item. Sometimes non-discretionary items don't reveal themselves until you're mid-year and it's not part of your plan, but it still has to get done. And the example that I cited was that of the Washington Cap and Invest program. And we started an initiative not long ago to support that, recognizing that that was going to be a regulatory reality for some of our WEIM members, and that was that we needed to find a way to put that on the plate that, like I said, is already very full, and I think you all have acknowledged that as well. The other thing I wanted to draw out is just, the boxes here, the blue and green boxes, represent policy development, and towards the end of those boxes, as the policy development goes along and it's getting finalized, we're starting to write business requirements, we're starting to draft tariff language. So that's kind of underlying. I think I've used that word a few times. There are things, there are concepts and activities embedded here that it would be too much to try to include here, but I want you to have a sense of what else is going on. And then, of course, as it's noted here, the diamonds really denote the targeted implementation date, and the line that goes from the policy to the targeted implementation is a very thin straight line, but keep in mind there's a tremendous amount going on there, both for the ISO staff and for our vendors and for legal and at Ferc. And there's also a tremendous amount going on for stakeholders as they get prepared to participate in the implementation of that initiative. So that could be system changes or just participating in the tariff process, participating in BPM processes. So there's a lot of activity that's captured by that thin blue line. So I wanted you to kind of keep that in mind as you look at this as well. Those big policy boxes take up maybe a disproportionate visual space, and I want to acknowledge all the other work that goes on.
This is very helpful, Jillian. Thank you for that. We'll take a quick question, if you don't mind, from Ian, please. Ian.
Hi, Jillian. This is Ian White with Shell Energy. I wanted to ask an in-the-weeds question about DAME. When I reviewed the comments, the ones I've reviewed, the preponderance of the most recent ones seem to suggest there's not stakeholder support with the current market design. So I was kind of curious to see that on not necessarily the top of the agenda, but on the continuation on the docket here. Do you have any thoughts on that, or is the ISO going to continue pursuing DAME? Sort of in spite of the comments? So just curious for your thoughts.
Well, that is absolutely the kind of information that we take into account. In addition to, this is a great point, right? In addition to the comments on the catalog itself on the 23rd, in addition to the comments on the draft roadmap we'll publish later this year, those kind of comments really help inform what we put together as our draft for and ultimately the final roadmap. So those are absolutely top of mind when we're putting this together. This here represents our best thinking at the end of 2021. So this I almost didn't put this up because I don't want people to get bogged down and now so much has transpired over the last year and we've been involved in these initiatives and we have questions and we have concerns, and those are all valid, and we've been receiving those, absolutely through the initiatives themselves. But I think, that would be, to the extent that you see those comments not captured when you see the draft roadmap, that would be fantastic feedback at that point in this particular process. Now, as to we haven't started actually picking that apart, so I can't weigh in at the moment to tell you yes, that box needs to be moved over here, or it needs to be quite a bit longer, or it needs to be broken into multiple boxes. I'm not prepared to give that kind of insight into the DAME schedule, but your point is very well taken.
Okay, yeah, just curious about that. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Do we have any other quick questions, please, or we'll help Jillian close this out?
Doesn't look like we currently have any verbal questions.
Great. Jillian, we'll give it back to you as we close this out. You have about 5 minutes if you like.
Sounds great. Sounds great. I won't take more than my allotted time. And we can, if you want to pop to the next slide, you can see that there's, further detail broken down, again, with the policy initiatives. You start to really get a sense of how full the plate is. And then just one more slide on this to show you what the annual breakdown looks like. We can go one more forward. Right, and then this is what the sort of detailed breakdown for just at the time this was put together, the upcoming year. So this is just for 2022. So we can go to the next slide. I think that's it, actually. Oh no, this is important. I'm glad I didn't end too early. So I wanted to one more time underscore for you, apropos of your question and the reason for your invitation to me today to talk you through this, opportunities for input, super important. So twice annually, generally in January and July, there's a call for stakeholders to submit items to the policy initiatives catalog. But as I've mentioned several times, we accept and appreciate submissions all year round. We use that information to update the catalog, making sure that we denote initiatives that were underway and are now completed, initiatives that were on the back burner and have moved into being underway. We go through we delineate each and every one of the submissions that we got and whether or not they were in fact a policy initiatives and thus warranted being included in the catalog. And that update was published several weeks ago, and comments again are due on that updated catalog on 9/23. The final catalog is published, the roadmap is developed, we published that draft roadmap, and we solicit comments from stakeholders on that as well. The next step I didn't put here is to give the Cal ISO Board of Governors and the WEIM governing body a briefing on that roadmap in executive session, and this year we'll be doing it in December, followed quickly by a public unveiling is not the right word, but a public description and laying out in detail everything that is in the revised final roadmap, and that we're targeting the first board and governing body meeting of 2023. So that's just a quick recap on the mechanics of where we definitely appreciate your intervening and commenting in this process. Okay, and I think we can go to the next one, and I believe that is the last slide. Happy to answer any last questions, but please don't really consider them last questions. I just realized I'm remiss in not including my contact information here, but I'm not hard to find, and this is not your only opportunity to ask these questions. I really appreciate you reaching out either directly to me or through your CAISO liaison, and let me know if you have thoughts or suggestions or questions. Appreciate all three.
Jillian, thank you. If you can go back to the last slide, and I will make a request to you on behalf of the RIF liaisons. I have a feeling my colleagues will not disagree with me that you indicated that you'll be making an executive update in an executive session to the board, which is totally, which makes sense and appropriate. However, it would be great after that, early next year in our next RIF public meeting in 2023, if we were to have you come back and share any takeaways, any important changes this year, and or any reactions from the board that are appropriate for you to share without compromising the executive nature of the conversation. I think the RIF liaisons and the sectors would value what's next and what will be different in 2023. That'd be my 2 cents. I don't know if my colleagues agree with me.
I think that's a fantastic suggestion. I've taken that down here, and I will talk to my team about incorporating that formally in the process.
Okay, I'll give one more chance to my colleagues to chime in. Thanks.
I'll just raise one thing while we're talking about next steps. Is that I think a lot of folks know, but it's worth reiterating that the GRC's governance proposal currently has a proposal that is a roundtable discussion on the policy roadmap. So I think once we have more clarity in early next year about whether or not that is in fact going to be, if it's adopted, approved, et cetera, we would be happy to have you back, Jillian, to have some of maybe more mechanical discussions about what that looks like if it does get approved. So thank you. I think this was really helpful context for us going forward.
Yeah, and thank you, Kathleen. That's good. FYI, just so you know, I think you missed the opening where we realized that Jillian is not deeply steeped into the governance aspects of the proposal that involves the roadmap, but I think we can make that kumbaya happen in a 2023 meeting where we should bring someone from the GRC to be on this call and then speak to what they're thinking also.
I think I just suggested that too.
No, that's true. I totally like your idea. That's what I'm just confirming.
Okay.
That makes sense. Thank you. Anybody else, please? I don't have visibility into hands raised.
We do have another caller here. I'll go ahead and open their line.
Hey, Dan from Customized Energy Solutions again. Sorry for not getting this in earlier. So one thing that I think could use some clarity in the future is how the roadmap process builds into or overlaps with the budget and GMC process each year. It seems like we always get some discussion of how the plans for the next year are impacting the budget cycle before the roadmap is completed. And so I'm kind of curious if in the future the CAISO could lay out a little bit, like if stakeholders want to be sure that their feedback is informing things before the budget gets set, do they need to be weighing in the early part of the roadmap process, versus sort of where we are now, or how do those timelines line up? Because as you said, there's the budget then constrains what can get done in the roadmap. So there's a bit of a feedback loop there, it seems.
Sure, I think that's a fair point. I mean, there's definitely a lot of back and forth consideration, in terms of budget, but also in terms of, human bandwidth, vendor bandwidth, stakeholder bandwidth, just for how much can be absorbed. So dollars are certainly important, and I recognize those considerations, and that process has its own timeline, and it's not really drawn out here. So I appreciate that, and I will take that to heart and see what I can do to kind of weave that into this kind of discussion.
Great, thanks again.
Thank you. Any other questions? I think we're late by 10 minutes, but I think this is very valuable. Any other questions on the call, please, from anybody else before I make my final request to Jillian on behalf of RIF, please.
I don't currently see any questions at this time.
Great. Thank you, Marvin. On behalf of all the RIF liaisons, Jillian, thank you for giving time. I also want to throw an idea out to you that this is a two-way street. If you feel there are ideas or questions that you or Brad and you or others in the CalISO team feel you would like to get RIF input, the doors open the other way too. The key opens and closes both sides. So feel free to come to us if you want to pick our brains, or some of my colleagues are like Kathleen, Matt Lecar, and others are quite steeped into some of the stakeholder processes and your initiatives. So feel free to reach out to us as well. Don't feel that we are just there to give updates to. We could be a source of brainstorming and giving input, as we've been authorized and empowered last year. So please think of us as an asset, not just as a stakeholder, good to have and good to give reports to. Just being frankly, politely honest, if you don't mind.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that feedback. I look forward to sharing that with colleagues who weren't able to be on the call today. And thank you again for the invitation. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you. Okay, we will take a 10-minute break if that's okay with everybody. It was supposed to be 15 minutes, but we're running a little late, and I want to help make sure that we give full justice to the deep dive. For those on whichever time zone you are in, but we're exactly at 12:02 Pacific, 1:02 Mountain. We'll come back at 12:10 Pacific, let's say 12:12. Let's say a good 10 minutes, and then I'll give it over to my colleague Josh Walter and Kathleen, who will take over the deep dive. As Stacy Crowley has already indicated at the beginning, the timing couldn't be more, unfortunately, coincidental and better with the stress condition we have with our weather changes and other matters. So the deep dive will focus on it. The agenda covers it pretty well, but see you all in 10 minutes. And Marvin, am I correct? This line will be on, and if people want to mute, they need to mute their own system. Am I correct?
That's correct. So I would make sure that if you are a speaker, you go ahead and place your device on mute, and once we get back, you should be able to just speak when ready.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. I see I have my colleagues Josh and Kathleen. Welcome for anybody who's joined just for this segment of the RIF meeting. We're going to talk about stress condition in the WEIM panel. I give it to my colleague and the vice chair Josh to tee it up, since it was an idea discussion topic that Josh originally had also raised in our liaison call, and then Kathleen Colbert will kindly help moderate the deep dive panel. A big thank you to the panelists, and I will be on mute, and I will come back to when we help close this. But Josh and Kathleen, to you. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Vijay. Hello, and thank you all for attending today. We have a great panel on a highly relevant topic in light of the continued heat event across the West this week. Although in the Seattle area, we've cooled down significantly. I'm actually in a sweatshirt right now. It's and outside on the back deck, so it's not quite as hot as it was yesterday. Hopefully, there's some relief for others across the West. The panel discussion today will take a deep dive into stress market conditions and will be moderated by Kathleen Colbert. I don't have much else to say and want to hand it over to Kathleen to introduce the scope of the conversation and the discussion and the panel participants. So thank you all again for being here, and handing it off to Kathleen.
Thank you, Josh. I really appreciate it. This is Kathleen Colbert from Vistra. I'm the Senior Director of Western Markets Policy for Vistra, and I am also a liaison for my sector, along with my co-liaison, Ian White, who's also here. But I'm one of the two IPP and marketer sector liaisons in the regional issues forum. I am very pleased to moderate this panel of extremely experienced individuals in our industry to discuss stress conditions in the West. This panel is hopefully going to be able to have a deep dive into issues that are of particular importance and relevance to those that have graciously agreed to join us today for this discussion. What we're looking to unpack, and I'm not going to reiterate what's on the agenda, but I'll try and just give you a little highlights of the scope. What we're looking to unpack is what are the different roles of balancing authority area operations, merchant operations, and nested within merchant operations is market operations as well for the energy imbalance market, and if they're in the context of a future extended day ahead market, that as well. So merchant operations, market operations, and transmission operations. These three prongs are really critical, and each of them are a little different, and the operations differ by areas as well. So we've tried to pull together a diverse panel to touch on these points. Panelists may bring up, and we'll try to tease out discussions on how risks from other systems, so transmission system, gas system, technology systems, those types of risks can occur that are kind of exogenous or external to what we think of as like the actual energy service, but that propagate onto the energy system when risks occur and can cause energy stress conditions when that occurs. I'll say system or local, kind of depending on what type of issue occurs. We're also going to try and delve into what are the actions within these different functions that might be taken to try to mitigate the risks leading up to a emergency condition or stress condition, and then even during that. One of the topics that is likely going to come up that we're going to have a moderator facilitated question on has to do with how we prioritize transmission access or energy service across the different types of customers within a given area, native load, network, or interchange customers. In addition, we also want to kind of delve into, well, we have these markets, but we also have alternatives to those, and how do they operate, whether in coordination or as alternatives to each other. Like I said, a lot of interesting stuff to unpack. So without further ado, I'll kind of go over the format of the panel, the panelists, and then the format. So I am joined by Chris Bossard from the California ISO. Thanks for switching slides, appreciate it. Danny Johnson from the CAISO. And Danny is bringing both like the CAISO and the Western Energy Imbalance market operations perspective to some extent. And he can talk about that more when he introduces himself. Jessica Kelsey from Arizona. Kelsey Martinez from Public Service in New Mexico. And then Paul Hines is joining us from Energy Hub, bringing a demand response DER perspective. Where the RIF really appreciates the time from all the panelists here. The way that I plan to kind of facilitate this is that I'm going to invite in that order each of the panelists to give like a five minute or so introduction, explain a little bit more about your organization, yourself, and what are the topics that you would like to share with the group as to lay the foundation. We'll take a brief break after that, and then come back for moderator facilitated questions by me. So without further ado, we will stop for questions from the audience. And unless we see any chat saying that if you want to ask a question, send a chat and I'll ask Emily or someone to kind of check that or raise your hand. I'm going to try to get through and give the panelists time to respond to the questions first, and then open it up for audience, just as a heads up. Any questions before we get the panel started?
As a reminder, you can use the raise hand icon, or if you dialed in, you can use #2 on your telephone keypad. It looks like we have no questions at this time.
Great, thank you. With that, can I invite Chris to come turn your video on? Perfect, thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Chris Bossard. I'm a shift manager in real-time operations at ISO. I've been at the ISO for 19 years now, getting close to 20 years. So I've seen a lot of changes in real time with our markets, with the generation fleet, the transmission system, everything like that. I've got a quick introduction here with some concerns and challenges that we have in real time for days like today that we're having, stress conditions on the system. I'll just start with when we're running the day-ahead market, our forecasting. There's so much behind the meter solar now. Our forecast department has to figure out how to translate intermittent cloud cover or slate gray cloud cover, different types of cloud cover into megawatts and integrate that into our forecast. I think we're seeing this summer and the last couple summers, climate change is a thing, and we are getting more extreme hotter weather than we've experienced in the past. We also have demand response when we have days like today, and we have multiple day heat waves. You guys are probably all aware of the various DR programs that we have. Some of it's scheduled in the day ahead market. Some of it's bid into the market and gets dispatched to real-time market. That DR for following days, subsequent days, and even a day next year, that DR has to be taken into account for the load forecast. That we can't count on that DR happening tomorrow or the next day. So that's kind of a challenge that we have for that. And we don't have similar days anymore. When I started at the ISO, and I worked at a balancing desk, a generation desk. If I was trying to look ahead during today and kind of forecast where I was going for peak time, I could go back to last week, last month sometimes, or 2 years ago, 5 years ago, and I could find a similar day that had a load profile that had a similar shape, similar magnitude, and I could kind of use that as a predictor for some of the decisions that we make. We can't do that anymore because the load's changing so fast, behind the meter solar is changing so fast, the weather is changing so fast. So I know for our forecasting team and for us in real time, not having historical data that's repeatable or useful in the future is definitely a challenge. Obvious thing is also a challenge for us this time of year is fires. We had fires yesterday that were impacting the power system and impacts our ability to import. California is a net importer, California ISO. So we're dependent on that. And when we have fires up near Coy, past 66, there's only 3 500 lines that connect us with the Pacific Northwest. And 2 of them share a common right-of-way. Actually, there's a portion where all 3 share a common right-of-way. So there's definitely risk there for one fire reducing our capacity by thousands of megawatts. More challenges are the conventional gas plants that we have left over on the system now. They're aging, arguably less reliable. And that retired capacity is being replaced with intermittent resources, wind and solar, that it requires forecasting and can't be counted on during different parts of the day, like at peak time or net load peak. We're also having to deal with adapting to new technology, new generation types, different market products that we're having to adapt to. It's like battery technology. We're getting battery technology on the system now that ramps differently than conventional resources. We have to worry about state of charge, making sure that the battery fleet has adequate state of charge during peak and net load peak times. I would interject there that I've seen this summer that the battery fleet's been doing a very good job bidding and scheduling themselves that way. So there is pretty good state of charge, pretty good battery capacity at net load peak time. These batteries and solar units, for that matter, they are receiving dispatch, 5-minute dispatch, 15-minute dispatch through the ISO market. Some of them are also on AGC, automatic generator control. And we've had to enhance those systems to deal with state of charge, faster ramp rates, and different things like that with new technology. One item I wanted to talk about today too that's definitely a challenge and is a huge concern during periods of time like today and this week is IT robustness. I mean, like software and hardware robustness at the BA level and at the resource level. If we have an EMS is energy management system that contains the ISO BA's AGC system. That's how we monitor voltages, frequency, megawatt and amp flow on circuits. If we have an outage on that system, our situational awareness is diminished greatly. We have, in the West here, we generally have a common scheduling software vendor. If that vendor has problems or issues, it can lead to widespread issues and impacting interchange, imports and exports, or schedule curtailments if there's forced outages. Also, we've moved away from kind of the tradition for limits on the system, SOL, system operating limits, megawatt flows and limits on lines and circuits and paths. We've moved away from predefined, pre-studied limits. Danny Johnson can talk about that. He used to be an OE, an engineer. Before, all of our paths and predefined circuits had limits that Danny would study months in advance, and we would just stay under those limits. Now we've moved towards a real-time assessment idea where we have a real-time contingency analysis program that's running every 5 minutes, and that tells us if we're approaching any base case or N-1 flow limits on the system. If that program is down, we have less of the old predefined limits to fall back on. So we're becoming more dependent on real-time contingency analysis. We also have WEIM now. There's multiple BAs in the West now that depend on 5-minute dispatch to balance load and resources, AGC. They depend on WEIM to redispatch generation to deal with SOLs also. We have 5-minute ETSRs, thousands of megawatts that fluctuate between BAs on a 5-minute basis via WEIM. If there's a WEIM outage, market disruption, now that's having a larger and larger widespread impact. So those are some examples of what I mean by IT robustness, making sure these systems are hardened, reliable, and they have high percentage of uptime to minimize outages, because we've moved away from when I started at the ISO, if we had any system problems, I could hop on the phone and redispatch a handful of generators on the phone and fix the problem that I have. Now our fleet is much bigger. It's made up of many smaller resources, solar and batteries and smaller resources, and not these big gas plants. And our manual actions that we used to have as a backup when our systems had problems are getting smaller and smaller. So when we're talking about stress conditions, challenging conditions, risky conditions, I wanted to bring up the fact that we need to stay focused on keeping our systems up, reliable, stable. One last item, and I can answer questions about any of these items as need. We did last year and this year change our emergency procedure 4420 away from the staged steps that we had for decades, and moved towards the NERC EEA kind of system to simplify it. It's way more streamlined. It aligns with the reliability coordinators steps also. It's made everything much easier and streamlined for us in real time when our emergency. That's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I really appreciate it. Operator, can we look and see if there's any, questions from the RIF liaisons first, and then we'll go to the phone call?
Sure. And again, I'm not seeing any hands raised right now. You can use the raise hand icon located at the bottom of Zoom, or if you dial in via the phone, #2 on your telephone keypad. Okay, taking a look here, I don't currently see any questions coming through.
Great, thank you for that. And thanks again, Chris. Let me segue and invite Kelsey Martinez. Can you go next and do an introduction and share some of your thoughts?
Hello. Can you guys hear me all right?
You sound
great. Thank you for, well, now Kathleen, you're frozen, so hopefully that's not my connection. Can you guys still hear me? Give me a thumbs
we
up.
Can.
Yep. Okay, great. So thank you for having me on this panel this afternoon. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk about stress system conditions. And my quick background, I've been with PNM as my utility experience here for a little over 10 years, and system operations was almost where I started. I did a little stint in distribution planning and some more customer facing pieces of the company, but ultimately really enjoyed the real-time operations and what system operations did with the transmission grid and the reliability aspect. So my background was that I was a transmission operator, I was a BA operator, then I managed the operations group for 5 years. And recently, as of March, I've taken on a new role of the regional transmission organization and markets manager. So I'm just learning all the other pieces of this puzzle with market terminology and market design and all of those EDAM meetings that we love so much. All of that is new to me, and I'm really enjoying learning all of that piece. But one thing I've noticed in these regional meetings, and maybe less with this group in particular, but there really is a little bit of a lack of operations experience present at these meetings. So I'm very happy to try to provide the BA perspective and definitely the non-ISO BA perspective for the stress system conditions we have to talk about today. So I don't have slides, but I'll quickly frame P&M as a company just so you kind of have an idea where I'm coming from. So P&M is the balancing authority and transmission provider for a big chunk of New Mexico, pretty much the whole state for the BA anyway. But even though we have a pretty big geographic footprint, we don't have all that much load. Our native load is right around 2,000 megawatts. And if you take into consideration our network load and network customers, it's right around 2,500 megawatts. So pretty small, but our network customer penetration is notable. We have Tri-State within our system, which owns and operates a great deal of transmission and serves load through their partner membership co-ops. So we do have a lot of experience with how we deal and cooperate with network customers, network transmission during stress system conditions. Also notable for New Mexico is definitely the renewable potential, a lot of which is still unharnessed. Obviously, we have a lot of solar. It's sunny here 300 days a year, but maybe more unique to New Mexico is our wind potential, most of which is still, waiting to be queued up, waiting for us to build more transmission lines to get it out of there. But even today, there's right around 3,000 megawatts of capacity in the eastern part of our state. And on windy days, that represents way more than our load in our entire BA. So obviously that doesn't sink in our load. We have quite a bit of firm point-to-point sales, and all of that wind is sinking in California BAs and Phoenix area BAs as well. So we also have, even though we're kind of a small company, we do have quite a bit of experience and interaction with point-to-point sales and transmission, large amounts of generation moving through our system. And so that comes into play quite a bit in stress system conditions as well. Finally, we've been in EIM or WEIM, I don't know what to call it these days, but since April of 2021. So we're just about a year and a half in, and it's already evolved a lot since we've been in it. And our ETSR connections are with APS, SRP, Tucson, and we will have connections with El Paso Electric as soon as they join. So I've really been thinking about the topic of this panel a lot over the past year, and not because I thought I would be on a panel or thought, we'd be on a panel on these particular stress system days, but one of my last tasks as the system operations manager was to rewrite the P&M emergency plans. Probably like a lot of your organizations, our plans met compliance with EOP 11, which is the NERC compliance requirement for these types of days. So EEA events, transmission emergencies, anything that might end up resulting in like load shed scenarios or other manual operator actions. But our plans always met compliance. We could check all of those compliance boxes, but it wasn't really helpful for system operators, the ones that are sitting there and having to actually get through these days. And it also wasn't very coordinated with other areas in our company that are becoming more and more important, like corporate communications, getting the word out to our customers ahead of time, and even just much more interaction with with our distribution operations now that DERMS and behind the meter solar and generation is becoming more and more of a relevant. So the rewriting of these plans was definitely happening at the same time that we were joining EIM. So I set about with the task of defining what each operator group in our control room does during these emergency conditions, and particularly really up to that knee of the curve where we are really facing load shed. Load shed is imminent EEA3 type situations. And I wasn't finding much about what the EIM operator's role could be in these situations. And I definitely thought I was just a little ignorant. We were very new in EIM, but after talking to a lot of people and reading a lot of documents, I realized, this is a gray area. Once you get to the kind of the defining point where now it's a BA responsibility, the market guidance, there are some pieces of advice, but it's largely undefined and not very straightforward. So some of the recommendations might be to limit your ETSR exports, to load bias, to make your load appear higher and bring more energy into your system, or even to try to refrain from market participation altogether. And none of those really seem straightforward to apply to stress system conditions, particularly energy stress system conditions to me. And what became very obvious to me was that the EIM operator is sitting in front of the most sophisticated tool in the Western energy market, Western energy industry, backed by the most amount of data, and with the sophistication of even to send real-time generation dispatch signals. And at the same time, we didn't have the ability to realize that potential to have that help us in these critical moments. So I am very interested in this discussion and how this can kind of maybe lead to market evolution where we have more tools available to help us with reliability. And I realized that this was not any kind of design failure on the part of the EIM design, and it's definitely not from a lack of concern with BA members of EIM. It's really more a misalignment with BA compliance being a very patchworked system here in the West and not overlapping with the market footprint, which is what our tools do, our new sophisticated, better tools. So I'm really interested in ways that the market can kind of respect the uniqueness of the West, that we have these patchwork BAs that have this compliance obligation, and at the same time we have a fast growing need and reliance on the energy imbalance market to provide reliability in these situations. And that's similar to what was said previously. That's because of the increasing uncertainty due to the renewable penetration. Our geographic footprint is quickly becoming much more uncertain, and of course we're always going to rely more on our neighbors and more regional collaboration with that level of uncertainty growing. So we're still kind of old school, trying to operate our systems in these tight conditions at the BA level, but our best tools with the most potential and the most amount of data are kind of saying, oh, wait, this is a BA thing. Let's stop here, and you have very limited ways to harness this great technology in real time. So I'm very interested in how we can evolve these markets to really respect this uniqueness in the West and this transition period of time where we're trying to become more regional, and hopefully these market awkwardnesses as a result of that go away eventually, and we're all in one big RTO with a market footprint that aligns more with our compliance obligations. But in the meantime, we're going to need to work through some market elements that really help us through these kinds of scenarios. So that's really what I wanted to say. I'm really happy to be here for this discussion, and thank you for having me.
Great, thank you so much, Kelsey. We did get one question from one of the BRIF members, Kanye Dorland, via chat. I'm going to read her question, and then I'm going to ask you to respond to something a little bit broader, because I think that would help the entire community. But Kanya wanted to know, she heard you mention that your native load was roughly 2,000 and kind of wanted to know more about that, I think.
Yes. Okay. So, yeah, native load meaning the load that P&M merchant serves, right? So P&M's merchant arm has native load, or we call it retail load. It's P&M system load. But then P&M operates a wider BA footprint that includes network customers with network load, such as the co-ops that use Tri-State as a transmission operator and provider.
Great, thank you. And did you say that the combined of those were roughly 2,500? Because I remember you saying that too.
Yeah, a little less, but that's rough, yes.
That's roughly the same. In your area, would you say that the share is mostly on your retail load, their native load side, or on that network customer side? I think you mentioned that as well.
So the retail native load is quite a bit bigger. That's P&M system load, and that's 2,000 megawatts roughly. And then there's less than 500 megawatts of network customer load, most of that being Tri-State.
That's really helpful. And let me just see, Kanya, can you raise your hand, and if that didn't answer your question, and let us know? And this is also a good time for anyone else to raise their hand if they'd like to ask a follow-up. Thanks.
I did see a raised hand, I believe, Doug.
Hi, this is Doug Bochin-Yone. I really appreciate the discussion. I'm just curious as if you could elaborate, not so much on the impact on compliance and the sort of the BA versus market interaction, but also just like if you have any observations about your participation in the EIM, how that's affected sort of day-to-day operations and normal conditions. And if you can contrast that with, okay, what changes, what makes it more challenging? If there's a difference when you're on the stress day conditions, what's the distinction there?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah, I think ultimately there's a lot of problems that the market is going to really help us with, right? Particularly transmission constraint issues where the market can really help you dispatch around that if there's adequate participating resources kind of on both sides of the congestion. So in a lot of ways, the market gives us so much more visibility and help from such a bigger footprint than we used to have visibility of and try to solve problems with. So for those particular situations, it's really going to help us. The ones that I think remain a little bit unsolved are the resource sufficiency problems. So stress days where we might be in an energy supply situation. And, in those cases, it's sometimes it's a little bit hard. So the system operators are trying to meet compliance with things like BAL, which is a NERC requirement, and CPS 1 and 2. And a lot of times, our ACE is doing one thing and it might not match up exactly with what the market is doing. And there's a big timing difference sometimes, 7 to 10 minutes before the market might be able to respond. And sometimes these load shed events, they're 7 to 10 minutes. That's a big deal when you're trying to make a decision on exactly what to do. So in that way, not having your ACE or your area control error be quite as straightforward now that it has all these EIM transfers that are inside of that ACE, that can complicate kind of a decision a little bit. So I'd say that's one thing that's maybe a little bit more challenging, but I think that the market itself and the tools and the potential are really there to help us in those scenarios. It knows how much generation is out there. It can send the control signals. It should be the easiest and the best tool to solve issues like that for us if we can figure that out. And it's going to be difficult. Other markets haven't had to do this, right? So most entities in the East really kind of in the East and the ISOs really formed these regional collaborations before the markets or in parallel with them. So all the design really kind of incorporated that with them. And the West is a little bit unique in that we still have these patchwork BA compliance issues, and the market needs to kind of interact with them and help us out in this transition period. Hopefully it's a transition period and we'll all end up in a big footprint at the end.
Great.
I don't know
Thanks.
if that answers the question, Doug.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Okay, it doesn't look like we currently have any additional questions.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Kelsey, so much. That was really, really fantastic. Let's move right along to our next panelist. Can I invite Jessica Kelsey from APS to introduce yourself and share some of your thoughts?
Hi, sure. Let's see if my video works. Okay. Looks like it's working. All right, great. So thanks so much for having me. I am Jessica Kelsey. I am supervisor of APS real-time trading and resource operations. I have worked in the industry for the last 9 years. All that time's been with APS. So in my current role and as supervisor of real-time trading and resource operations, my team is responsible for the marketing end of our business, so overseeing all real-time operations, commodity trading, commercial activities in markets, help ensure system reliability, risk management, regulatory compliance, and economically dispatching APS's more than 70 generation resources. I guess, so, oh, there's my slides. I might be the only one that did them or went this route. So just, we can go to the next slide. Thanks. So brief intro into APS. So we are the largest electric utility in Arizona, serving customers in 11 of Arizona's 15 counties. We've got a service territory of nearly 35,000 square miles, and we serve more than 2.7 million customers. So I just realized not long before this started that I have an old slide, and we have a lot more customers that we serve. We also have a diverse supply of generation resources serving our customers. So our portfolio includes our baseload capacity from nuclear and coal, flexible natural gas resources, and we've got a variety of clean energy resources, including renewables such as wind, solar, energy efficiency, and demand response. So we can go to the next one. All right. Just kind of how we look at stress system conditions and some takeaways that we have. So one, we're prepared, APS, we're prepared to serve our customers at all times through any conditions, whether it's extreme heat, intense cold, or unexpected peak in demand. Arizona's energy infrastructure is fully weatherized for both summer and winter conditions. We go through rigorous and thorough maintenance protocols. And then especially after the storm in 2011, the winter storm, Arizona utilities, including APS, we utilized that 2011 storm as a learning opportunity. And we conducted careful inspection of power plants and transmission distribution lines to implement improvements. We invested in weatherization, and we also established preventative maintenance programs and procedures to inspect potentially vulnerable systems at our power plants every time temperatures drop below 32 degrees. Another big part of how we handle system or stress system conditions is through careful planning, monitoring, and adjusting. APS, we've been able to maintain continuous, affordable, and reliable service to our customers. Just looking back during one of the most significant energy shortfalls, which is back in 2020 in the West, that we've seen in the past 2 decades. So just having an adequate reserve margin and diversity of supply, both in terms of generation and fuel, is critical to being able to respond to unplanned events. APS, we plan for a 15% energy margin, and this power reserve margin that we operate with ensured that we could operate in an extreme situation without interruption in service. And we were ready for unplanned situations like loss of generation or transmission line. Another key aspect that we look into is ambient derates. So ambient derates, especially in extreme heat conditions, can reduce available capacity. So we've included ambient derates also in our long-term planning, so our resource adequacy planning, and we do continuously test, monitor, and adjust to reflect actual capacity. Each season, we do conduct a lessons learned evaluation, and we implement any required steps to make the next seasons more resilient. Another aspect of looking at stress conditions days, we've evolved our no-touch day procedure. So we now also have a kind of pre-step to a no-touch. We included, it's a constrained operations day declaration, as well as our no-touch and constrained operation day declarations not only include generation and transmission, but they also include our IT departments. Next slide. All right, so thinking about some of the challenges, so just high level, some of the challenges that we experience in stressed system conditions include gas management. So just one of the I think key elements is that stressed system conditions are not only stressed generation or transmission conditions. It also includes natural gas pipeline and supply conditions. Another challenge is load forecasting. And so here in Arizona, when we're over 100 degrees, a single additional degree of temperature is equal to about 150 megawatts. So increased temperatures of just 1 to 2 degrees can be the equivalent of an entire power plant. MSG management also can be a challenge, especially in WEIM. So many of our MSGs, the minimum downtimes of these flexible resources are not reflected in the current stuck window. And so that is a challenge, as we're having to essentially economically operate them outside of, well, within EIM, but not fully making them available to EIM. So we're controlling the dispatches and transitions. Another, and I know this was brought up earlier, but I think it's a really key item, is IT updates. So this was actually something that I know I've mentioned prior, and we included it in our no touch and our constrained ops. And it was something that we recognized in actually summer 2020 in our summer lessons learned. And that we made sure that we included, we did have generation and transmission included in our no-touch declarations and now constrained ops, but before we just hadn't considered including IT, and we do now going forward. So it is, IT updates really, I mean, they can have major unintended impacts, and so really they should just be avoided or rescheduled if we're facing stress system condition days. And then kind of the last point is talking about, constructive energy policy and market design are key. Looking at even yesterday and historically curtailed firm market purchases, just for our view, are just an illustration of how market resources cannot be counted on for reliability. And then also looking with, as we are transitioning as a region, as a country, towards renewables and storage, this introduces new sources of
Waffles is right here, babe.
This is Kathleen. I think someone's off mute. Just a reminder to please keep yourself on mute.
So just introduces new sources of complexity in resource adequacy planning. And so really frameworks for resource adequacy have got to be modernized to consider conditions across all hours of the year, as well as be met with physical assets. And that's the end of what I have.
Awesome. Sorry about that, Jessica. Thanks for
no worries.
But thank you so much. This was fantastic. I really appreciate all the things that you brought up. That'd be really helpful for us to delve into further. Does anyone have any questions for Jessica before we go to the next panelist?
It looks like Kelsey has a question.
Yeah, thanks, Jessica. I just kind of wanting to know a little bit more about how your your seasonal lesson learn is structured. What comprises that? How formal is it? I like that idea a lot. We don't do that, and also definitely going to work on adding IT updates in our no-touch scenarios.
Yeah, so it definitely our lesson learn exercises get a little bit more structured and formal each year as we do them, and so we include it's multiple departments. We get everyone together. We and we just start talking about everything that went on. What's something we could have done differently? What is something we didn't expect? And so we've got marketing and trading included. We have our BA included. We have generation representation. We have IT representation. We also have our customer solutions department involved. I know I might be forgetting a few, but it's very broad. It's pretty much almost a representation from almost every department in our company.
Thank you.
And essentially, and essentially what we do is we gather them all, and then we start talking about what actions need to be taken. And then we work through those, and you get timelines on that so that everything is taken care of and not kind of just talked about and then forgotten about.
Okay, it looks like we do have another question. I'll go ahead and unmute that caller.
Hi, this is Tanya Dorland with the Public Advocate's Office in California. And I appreciated Jessica's comments about, or Ms. Kelsey's comments about responding to stress conditions, and wanted to hear more about whether or not APS has had to procure new significant unforeseen generation to address extreme events, say since August 2020, since you mentioned that a 1% change in weather temperature could result in the need for new generation.
So yes, we have, and it does. One of the most helpful things that, or I guess kind of key elements of how we're able to respond is that we do plan with a 15% energy margin. And so if we do lose, a large generating resource, we're not it could put us still down to maybe 10% or maybe 5% if we've got multiple losses. So we still do okay, but then we do plan to, day by day, we look to make up for that, and intention is to maintain that 15% throughout the entire operating day. I don't have a specific examples offhand. I do know earlier in this year, we have had some days where we have had to make some significant amount of market purchases, bilateral, and also HASP purchases with CAISO, where we have lost multiple generators in a single day unexpectedly, and also had some transmission unplanned outages occur in those days. And it worked out in our favor, where the region was in we weren't in a I guess, system condition that we are today. Knock on wood, if this happens today, it could be a very different situation.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Connie, for your questions. Really appreciate it. Any other questions?
I don't currently see additional questions at this time. As a reminder, you can use the raise hand function located at the bottom toolbar, or you can dial #2 on your telephone keypad if you are on phone. It looks like we actually do have a question coming in from Vijay.
Hello, thank you for this presentation, Jessica, and to Kathleen, of course, for helping set this up. Prior to my joining WRA, I worked at WEC, WECC, as you may know. And at WEC, I represented WEC on the NASB in the transmission forum. But interaction with the gas sector, I learned a few things. That the gas sector, as we all know, operates on a very different set of rules and procedures. And when I mean gas sector, the wholesale gas sector and the delivery of gas, even to electric generators. So when you say the first two bullets under gas management, in the last 3 years, has APS come to find some experiences or lessons learned in terms of better coordination between the gas and electric sector in terms of the nomination cycles, or how to make a non-firm gas be more predictably available if it's not, as you are also a customer after all to the wholesale gas supply sector. So I'm just curious about what your thoughts are on that, and if you think better coordination could help, and in what way. Sorry, that was a bit of a
yeah, great question or questions. I would say definitely through EIM, our gas management has gotten much more finessed. We've gotten much more engaged. I would say, pre-EIM, we heavily relied on our storage. Now that we're, few years deep in experience in EIM, we still definitely do rely on our storage capacity, but we also are much more heavily interacting and transacting in intraday gas market. And that's to help manage our gas supply in either pipeline constrained conditions, if we've got alert days or SSCs or COCs, as well as what we see happening with transfers. We try to predict what the transfers are going to look like in our day ahead when we're kind of procuring our gas for the next day. But it's a guessing game, and so being a lot more active in the intraday gas market and managing it in intraday has definitely become a huge resource for us. I don't know if that answered your question.
It kind of does. Thank you for letting me know the avenue in which you've had more coordination happen. So it's on the intraday gas market as it pertains with the EIM transaction. So thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Jessica. And thank you for the question, Jay. If there's no other questions, I will invite Brady Klein from Energy Hub. Would you like to introduce your organization and share some of your thoughts?
Absolutely. Going to share my screen. Yeah, I might need presentation permission.
Just a moment here, Brady.
Yeah, no problem.
Should be able to share your screen now.
How's that?
We're currently able to see your screen. I'm not sure if you want to put that in full screen. There we go.
Cool. Hey, everybody. It's great to be here and chat with you all this afternoon. I'm Brady Klein. I manage the market development team at Energy Hub. We provide demand response services to utilities and, in some cases, wholesale markets. And we'll talk a little bit about our approach to doing that. We participate today through the CAISO, through the Resource Adequacy Program, as a subcontractor to a third-party DRP. So we provide DR resources as resource adequacy and day-ahead energy, and soon to be real-time participation along with that, in addition to some of the emergency programs in the CAISO, ELRP, and participate in a few other regions from the wholesale side. So my team on the market development team is sort of focused more on the wholesale market side, whereas Energy Hub's core business that we'll talk about is focused on providing tools to utilities to manage customer programs that leverage demand-side resources for grid services. So don't want to preach too much to the choir about the proliferation of DER, and this number is probably already out of date, but Wood Mackenzie estimated that about 397 gigawatts of centralized capacity would be displaced by distributed energy resources by 2025. So since we're coming up on that date, we should probably refresh and see what that number looks like today. But Energy Hub exists in order to harness all of that latent capacity that's happening independent of the utility or the market. And the platform that we provide to both markets and utilities to harness all of that latent capacity, mostly behind the meter today, is called our Mercury DERMS platform, which is the core of our offering. So on the software side of things, we go out and integrate with all of the leading demand response or original equipment manufacturers that can provide demand response capable devices. And so for the most part, that's connected thermostats, electric vehicle chargers, EVs themselves, residential batteries, some solar PV inverters, water heaters, and we have some C&I assets connected to the platform too. And we bring all of that to bear for either a utility demand side management program or a wholesale market product or service. In some cases, we can do both by providing a utility access to all of these devices for localized grid support on the distribution side, and where there is excess DR or DER capacity available to bid into the wholesale market with the utility as the market participant. And Jessica and APS are kind of doing some of that. We may be able to speak to our partnership with APS in a little bit more detail on how our DSM resource gets leveraged to do just that. But for the most part, utility demand side management practitioners grow the resource given the ecosystem of partners that we provide. So I won't, to try to spare you the eye chart, and your eyes might glaze over if you look too closely at this, but our purpose is to go out and integrate with as many of the leading manufacturers as possible to be able to deliver as big and dynamic and flexible of a resource to the market or the utility as possible. Promote customer choice, but also just expand the pool of devices that are out there that we can bring to bear for utility and market services. And that spans all of these device classes that are the most impactful electric internet connected loads in the home. And this doesn't jump off the screen as being super market focused, but a lot of the utilities we work with are starting to think a little bit more about how to leverage our resource, not just 10 or 15 times a summer during contingency events, but more as an operational or economic resource that can be used to keep market volatility or prices reasonable in the intervening hours between when heat waves like this, to get the most out of the resource. And so an example might be a utility in the PJM RTO that's using our bring your own device aggregation for price responsive demand as an example. Or it could be, in California, the model is kind of baked into the DR landscape, but a utility runs a demand response program, take Southern Cal Edison, and then that program has to be integrated into the day ahead market for visibility for CAISO and for bringing the most value out of the resource as possible. And I would love to see more of that, frankly. to the extent you are not double dipping, but you are providing multiple services to multiple stakeholders at both the retail and the wholesale level, while not getting double compensated for it. And I think we're just at the inflection point of starting to see our traditional DR programs that live in the DSM quadrant most times being kind of up-leveled into, well, how can a utility use this on a day-to-day basis and offer it in as economic DR to get more out of the resource in times where there is an emergency condition. So the core of what we do today is DER and DR programs that support demand side management in the distribution grid. I mentioned we're doing a little bit more on the wholesale side directly through scheduling coordinators in California and a demonstration pilot in the IESO in Ontario. And we participate directly in the ERCOT market as well. But we kind of bring all of the audiences together as much as we can. So we can kind of take the DSM resource and use it to manage the local distribution grid, bid it into the market, while all the while delighting customers and making sure it's easy for them to enroll and get compensated in a compelling enough way. And it's actually starting to make a real impact. I think when I started at Energy Hub 5 years ago, we probably had around 15 or 20 utility programs. They were pushing the DR button 5-10 times a summer, or maybe even fewer. Fast forward to last year, where across 60 utility programs, and including our markets portfolio as well, we've got headed toward 1 million devices on the platform, about 3 gigawatts of load under management. Not all of which is dispatchable, but I'd say maybe a third of which is, can be curtailed at any given moment. And then some vanity metrics on the amount of load that we've shifted. And this concept of device event minutes is a little bit abstract, but it's starting to show that, the bring your own device model for behind the meter DR is, really has legs and is getting to real significant scale. And what's more, the trend from smart thermostats to include other devices is accelerating. So lots of traditional smart thermostat DR and kind of DR 1.0 is pretty quickly accelerating into this world where utilities will have a 24/7 resource, or the market can have a 24/7 resource that can be bid across multiple device classes, each with the ability to dynamically shape load to the point where 24/7, we can kind of create load shapes based on the objectives of our utility partners or based on some kind of optimal strategy for bidding into the market. But I've been excited to see just how many of our partners have been cultivating multiple DER classes in the same program, so to speak, so that we actually don't just have this DR available during the resource adequacy window, as it were in California, but maybe we have the opportunity to expand and create new market products and services outside of 4 to 9 p.m. Pacific to take advantage of the flexibility of these resources across the full 24 hours. And so the resource adequacy reform in California, I think, is creating a really good foundation in this sort of slice of day world where you can nominate as much as your DER capacity may allow you to do outside of just the most important 4 hours of the day. The resource that we've seen at our disposal, that as we've sort of expanded from HVAC and beyond, obviously gets increasingly dynamic and increasingly more valuable, right? So whereas your blunt tool of 10 peak reduction events on smart thermostats can become a much more sophisticated grid service when you add EVs and EV chargers and batteries to the mix. And so we could probably debate the relative value of all of these services to the market, but it's exciting to see that we can actually start to do all of these things like load shifting and ancillaries and local network management with behind the meter resources, and beyond just your basic peak load mitigation. And at the risk of exposing myself and my transmission constraint and contingency naivete, And maybe it's a conversation starter for how overly simplified and silly this looks, but I think just to kind of ground truth this all back into like, why is a DR provider on this panel? I thought it'd be useful just to think through the most basic example of the usefulness of DR in a contingency scenario. And so if you could imagine a city or, maybe even a BA with interties that 1.5 gigawatts of load, and you lose one of those transmission exchanges or ties, or if you just lose, or there's some amount of congestion that prevents you from importing as much as you need. Very simply, DR can be used as a way to ensure a sufficient reserve margin to prevent escalation beyond whatever transmission emergency or EEA level that we're dealing with, to avoid whatever out of market dispatch and load shedding that might have otherwise occurred. And so I like to think of DR as, it's not really being used this way today, but I can imagine this world where BAs and EIM are not derating or submitting forced outages or planned outages to the extent they are today, because they know that they have these participating or non-participating DR resources that could kind of prevent the need to even submit the forced outage, right? Like if you have DR as this insurance policy, it might allow you to pass the resource efficiency evaluations much more easily if we are actually putting DR resources to work in the EIM. So I think there's this huge potential to take the traditional DSM programs and turn them into really valuable EIM assets in ways that they're not being used today. So I welcome all sorts of feedback as to how, if that is reasonable or silly or all of the above. But I think the perspective from the DR provider is that there's lots of untapped potential out there to be used beyond just traditional peak reduction, and looking forward to chatting about how this audience thinks it could be used. And that's all I've got, Kathleen.
Thanks, Brady. That was really helpful. I liked your slides. They're very cool. Does anyone have any follow-up questions for Brady?
And I'm currently not seeing any questions coming in. Again, you can use that raise hand function in the bottom toolbar or dial #2 on your telephone keypad. Okay, it looks like Kelsey might have a question here.
More of just a comment to your last slide there. I don't think that's silly. I think that's a pretty cool goal that I hadn't heard before. Just the idea of not even having to submit forced outages or planned outages is that's very exciting. That would make things so much easier if we had that. So it really is as simple as your picture in a lot of ways. And I do think that this has so much cool potential for the future. Thanks.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And if there's folks, and I'm not the EIM entity submitting resource plans, on the daily basis or whatever it is, but it strikes me that there's a lot of opportunity for DR to play a role in those plans, either as balancing capacity up or down, or reserves that can be made available to CAISO. LADWP or SMUD's DR programs are, I think, mostly supporting local reliability and supply costs, but I think there's a lot more they could be doing in the EIM. Somebody should keep me honest on that, but I think this was one example of how I think it could work.
Now, thanks, Brady. With that, let's have a good segue for Chris. Do you want to jump in?
Sorry, I was muted. That was a great slide, Brady. I like the idea. I would just clarify that a BA should be doing a real-time assessment 24/7. And if that last slide you had was reality, I think that the DR would be utilized pre-contingent before the line, because we're always protecting for the next worst contingency, right? The next worst credible contingency. So just to clarify the slide, otherwise I thought that was a great idea.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Chris. Any other questions?
Looks like we do have an incoming question here.
Yeah, this is Manuel Sanchez from PNM. I just wanted to I wasn't quite sure how you quantify the capacity associated with the DR. Maybe I missed it. In real time, how are you quantifying what on the system, what you've aggregated for that entity or for the BA as a whole?
Yeah, it takes a little bit of a, push the button and see what happens kind of experience with some tests and some statistical reliability. But the underlying tech is monitor the runtime or the load directly, like using our integration with all of the device manufacturers that are kind of partners. So we integrate with all of their clouds. We get a bunch of data coming back. We aggregate that all together. And in 15 minutes, it's really near real time. Think 15 minutes, how much load and how much available load there is to shed, and then getting updated every 15 minutes based on the current state of what we're connected to in load under management. And so you could imagine a 50,000 thermostat program in Arizona, roughly 1 kW per device. You kind of know that the deemed size of the resource is roughly 50 megawatts, but you can kind of adjust with some error bars in real time to know. We have capacity forecasting tools that help you kind of figure out what would be available 1, 2, 3, 4 hours from now to be able to bid or use locally.
Okay, no, that sounds good. Thanks.
Jessica, see your hand up.
Hi. All right. So I'm not sure if this is applicable, but I thought I would ask. So I know in like with our experience with some of our commercial DR programs, there have been seasons where we get customer fatigue, and I was wondering, do you experience that in your DR systems management, or how do you address that if you do?
Yeah, our primarily residential portfolio, and the data we've seen from past programs shows that 3, 4, 5 DR events in a row doesn't materially impact the load shed you can expect when you push the button. And so we've seen it this week, right, with market awards and KISO for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, with ELRP alerts on top of that. It's like 3 or 4 DR events in a row. And the load curves and the load shed look exactly the same those 3 days. And I think that's just the sort of statistical reality of what happens when you get, a consistent number of opt-outs every time you call the event, and you're getting different people to rotate in and out of those events every time. And so just sort of by nature of it being such a diverse resource, you might have somebody participate 2 out of the 3 days or 1 out of the 3 days, but on average, every time you push the button, you get just about the same thing. I think hopefully that answers your question, but we don't really see a downward trend, thankfully, if we were to run 3 or 4 events. We haven't actually done it, 6, 7 days in a row, so who knows, but.
Hopefully we don't get there. Yeah. No, thank you. So built into the model. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Operator, do you see any other hands?
I currently see no additional questions.
Great. Well, I'd like to introduce and invite Danny Johnson to go next. Introduce yourself and share with us some of your thoughts.
Thanks, Kathleen. So my name is Danny Johnson. I'm a member of the Market Infrastructure Policy team here at the California ISO. Prior to this role, as Chris referenced earlier, I spent about a decade in the operations engineering group at the KISO, so I've been here a while now. And one of the observations I made during my time here is a commitment to reliability, and really a commitment to reliability through markets. In fact, I think closer to our inception, this was actually the CAISO's official motto, was reliability through markets. While that has changed, I think our approach to markets hasn't. We fundamentally believe that markets can be used to improve system reliability in both normal and stress system conditions. This is primarily accomplished through security-constrained economic dispatch. Both in the day-ahead horizon and in the real-time horizon, we are running a fairly complex market model, multiple intervals into the future, trying to wring out all of the network transmission and resources that are made available to the CAISO to both minimize costs, but also respect all applicable security constraints on the system. We think just by definition, this, as compared to more of a traditional operating process, does offer reliability benefits just because it's occurring much, much more frequently with much more frequent data. Now, I think this is a little bit of an evergreen topic, but we are always actively trying to enhance our market design to increase reliability. Over the past few years, we've undertaken a number of different policy initiatives that are designed to enhance our pricing to make sure that we are sending the right price signals during stress system conditions. This work has not been completed. I think we actually fairly recently kicked off another initiative looking to further reform our price formation to ensure that the pricing that results during stress market conditions is both accurate and accurately valuing the resources that are participating, as well as transparent. We think that if we can do that, that serves to encourage participation from third-party resources who would be able to be connected to our balancing authority area. The more resource participation we can get during tight system conditions, obviously, the more our reliability will be increased. On top of this, the pricing aspects of our markets does provide another beneficial outcome, which is it provides financial discipline to follow market dispatch. A core tenet of having reliable operations is that the generators are following the dispatch they receive. If you get the prices right, they have every incentive in the world to follow this dispatch. We are also looking to try to incorporate out-of-market actions or demand-side emergency actions and account for those in our market prices, because obviously during stress system conditions, those do have impacts on prices. This is, again, a topic that we are continually working on because as we've seen in the subsequent regulatory action since the reliability events in August 2020, there is a large quantity of non-market-based resources that may be able to provide reliability services, but we're trying to really carefully coordinate these and ensure that they're not making participating in a market not as appealing for our market participants. On top of this, on our market design efforts, we've created a couple different flexibility products that are specifically designed to address uncertainty that can arise in different time horizons. We are working on a day-ahead product right now. We have a real-time product called FRP. What these products look to do is to take your normal forecast and to a fairly high confidence band, procure deliverable unloaded capacity, which then allows us from a BAA operation standpoint, or in the WEIM from a WEIM market operator standpoint, to better address any uncertainty that can arise in those near real-time or in the real-time, just because we already have the capacity procured to address that uncertainty. We are also striving to create a marketplace that is able to correctly value load modification and the demand side management programs that Brady just talked about. To the extent that we can encourage robust participation of load, that also helps reliability, especially in tight system conditions. That's one of the primary tools that I think a lot of folks have probably seen with the flex alerts that we've sent out that we try to utilize right now to manage tight system conditions. That's the market design side. We also believe that kind of expanding markets is good for reliability within the Western interconnection anyway. I think Kelsey talked about this a little bit earlier. regarding the expansion of EIM, and the EIM being a really sophisticated tool that can be leveraged for reliability. This arises because we have that security constrained dispatch that is considering everybody's relevant transmission constraints and optimally dispatching the system. On top of that, we are further looking to utilize the EIM to enhance reliability. An example of this would be our recent efforts through the Resource Sufficiency Evaluation Enhancements Initiative to create a new type of energy product called an assistance energy transfer, which when a BAA is experiencing stress system conditions and potential reliability conditions and supply or flexibility limitations, they would be able to utilize the EIM to backfill that deficiency and operate more reliably. While I'm talking here before I take questions, I think I do need to do a little bit of advertising. We are currently looking to extend our day-ahead market. Again, under the same principles I've talked about, we think this can enhance reliability. Simply from an operational standpoint, if each BAA is setting next day operating plans on their own, they have to make assumptions regarding what their neighbor's dispatch looks like, potentially what their neighbor's forecast looks like. To the extent that we can bring all of those assumptions and shine a light on them and make them more transparent and consider them holistically as part of a broader dispatch, that I think by definition would increase reliability in real-time operations. So I'd like to pause and see if there's any questions.
Thank you, Danny. That was really great. Any questions?
I don't currently see any questions. Oh, we do have a question coming through now.
This is Manuel Sanchez again at PNM. One of the things I was never sure about, when you guys are you talking about the secured economic dispatch runs? You're just basically evaluating what's going to the ETSRs between the BAs and the EIM BAs? And is that just like a mod 30 type of run, or how's that working? Are those DC power flows, or what's going on there?
Okay, so I think the ETSRs that you're referencing would define the transmission capacity and transfer capacity between the different BAAs participating. But when we're running our security constrained dispatch, we're running full AC power flow, and then on a 15-minute basis, running a unit commitment optimization that not only looks at the next 15 minutes, but looks anywhere from the next 15 minutes to 4.5 hours out, depending upon which run it is. That then serves as a unit commitment that then gets re-optimized in the 5-minute, again using an AC power flow, sending out different dispatch signals to optimally use all of the resources given any internal constraints within each BAA who's activated market constraints, and the ETSRs that are made available for transfers between BAAs.
I guess, what are you using, like the flow gates though, between the BAs, or because like PNM, we don't use mod 30, so we don't have any flow gates internally, but are you utilizing the information we're giving you to almost look like a flow gate between us and the next BA?
So we have a full network model that models the transmission systems of all relevant WEIM balancing authority areas, and then I think largely models the rest of the Western interconnection. There might be some slight simplifications for parts that are not in our control area. I'd have to check on that. We are then basically running power flow. You run a unit commitment optimization. You then send that over to the power flow application, and you're running an N-1 security analysis on it, determining if there's any relevant overloads on any internal transmission constraints, and that would be post-contingency for the N-1, but it also respects all pre-contingency operating limits. It's doing both. If there's any violations, it sends that result back to the unit commitment optimization, which incorporates that information, reruns the unit commitment optimization to resolve those potential constraint violations. And then this process iteratively runs until we have a cost minimized solution that respects all the transmission constraints. And that's happening every 5 minutes.
Okay. And so that's internal to RBA as well as your the Cal ISO system.
Yeah, on the BAA operation side, I think it's a little bit BAA by BAA basis. I can speak from the CAISO side. Back in my operations engineering days, you develop essentially operating plans anywhere from a few weeks out all the way through the next day, and you would be ensuring that any potential N-1 contingencies that could potentially result in a security violation would be modeled in the market, and the market would respect that. So I think that's functionality that is available to each BAA. I don't know if each BAA takes advantage of it in the same way that the CAISO does, but to the extent that that's something that you're interested in, I think that would be something the CAISO would be happy to explain how can be further leveraged.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll give a plug if this is helpful. And Manuel, these are good questions. This iteration, the way that the foundation of how the market runs is fairly complex. So we can talk more offline if you're interested. But I'd also make a plug that I'll say the EIM market operator rather than the CAISO, but the EIM market operator is available to field a lot of these specific questions. When an EIM entity onboards, there's a great deal of collaboration, coordination on exactly how that full network model Danny was just talking about gets built out. And then on an ongoing basis, what kinds of constraints would be modeled or how they would be represented. So if you don't feel like you're getting connected to the right folks, as a part of the RIF, we will help you get connected. So just send myself, Vijay, or anyone that's on the RIF committee an email, and we'll make sure that you're connected with the right folks inside the EIM market operations side to help.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's what we're here for. Ask questions, we'll try and connect people. Any other questions?
Seeing no other questions at this time.
Great, thank you, Danny. So I'm looking at
Kathleen.
I'm looking at the time. We don't have a great deal of time left, so what I'm going to recommend is that we not take a break, and that we push through and conclude as scheduled at 2. Is that good with you, Vijay? Okay, just checking. So I want to allow for other folks to ask questions. I do have, so what I'm going to do, unless anyone has a complaint, is I'm going to ask 1 or 2 moderator questions, but I'm going to leave time for other folks to jump in between them so that hopefully we can get through that in the next 20 minutes. So if I can ask all the panelists, can you turn on your video? We'll all put on our video now, and then we'll have the panel discussion portion. Got it. Looks great. Awesome. Thank you all. Okay, so thank you for all of your, first of all, your presentations and fielding the questions from the RIF. I think you all did a really good job talking through what some of the risks are that face your systems and or your operations. So I wanted to ask you maybe just to highlight in the day ahead planning horizon or the real-time period, if there are a couple key pre-emergency or emergency actions that you think are especially helpful to try to mitigate the risk of entering into a potential stress condition, or if we happen to find ourselves in the midst of that condition, to better aid the ability of the areas to ride through that event. So we've identified the challenges. What are 1 or 2 pre-emergency, emergency actions that you think are critical? And we'll just do this by raising your hand. So If you want to jump in and answer, please raise your hand. Or else I'll start picking people. Kelsey, do you want to?
Sure. So, I mean, it's all about forecasting for the day ahead situation. And that's what we've really tried to concentrate on. And the CAISO has really been our example for that. From an RC perspective, especially, they've done a great job of really getting the word out ahead of time, right? I think we all can tell from stress system conditions this week, we're getting emails, we're getting GMS messages, we're getting a lot of information about a stress system condition, and that's on a day ahead horizon. And so that's kind of number one, is there's so many ways to communicate these days, and taking advantage of all of those, both for your customers and your interconnected utilities. All of your stakeholders need to be aware of the situation. That's really key. So that's one. And then the second piece is just, maximizing generation. So if you have any outages planned, you've got to be canceling those if you can, bringing things back from outage if they were in outage, and really trying to implement kind of restricted work operations, both on the transmission side and the generation side, that Jessica was alluding to earlier, that they had now included IT in that as well. I think that's a great idea. But, people should not be touching things or performing maintenance during stress system conditions. And so those are just a couple really key elements that kind of go, preliminarily, those are not the real-time ones. Those are kind of day ahead, and definitely the forecasting is kind of the most important these days, and that's where we're kind of headed with our plans.
Thanks, Kelsey. Danny?
Yeah, thanks, Kathleen. I touched on this a little bit earlier, but I wanted to spend a little more time talking about the CAISO's multi-interval optimization. This is a tool that we think really helps real-time reliability. If you consider the stuck horizon, for example, we are looking at the next 18, 15-minute intervals and all of the subsequent forecasts and forecast changes within that horizon, and optimally committing or decommitting resources as we need to ensure that we have the right resource mix positioned to address any upcoming real-time challenges. This saves our BA operators from having to constantly be checking what the forecast is 4 hours away from now and comparing that to the day ahead forecast and looking at the unit commitment and ensuring that's correct. We're constantly iterating off of the day ahead forecast throughout the entire real-time market horizon to better be able to adapt and be nimble in addressing changing system conditions.
Thanks, Danny. Jessica?
Yeah, so I mean, forecasting is a huge element of it, and that's not only in the day ahead space, but also in the real time space. You're just continually reiterating that forecasting. But also, we in day ahead, we're looking at no touch day declarations. We could be looking at constrained operation declarations. We look at our customer engagement, so our demand response programs, our energy efficiency programs. We will look at our generation fleet. So if it's a high heat day, so if we're talking over 110, we're going to closely be evaluating, looking at those ambient D rates and making sure everything we have going into the day is a most accurate representation of what we're going to get out of that generation unit, or making adjustments as needed. Also, I mentioned we plan to a 15% margin in the day ahead space as well. Our day ahead term team will be out and will procure asset-backed purchases if we need to maintain that 15% margin going into the next day.
Thanks, Jessica. Can I just ask a quick clarifying question? You said asset-backed purchases. Is that kind of similar to what some other terms we use in California space are like resource-specific sales.
Correct.
Okay, thank you for connecting the dots. Appreciate it. Anyone else want to add any thoughts? Let me ask one more question before I see if there's anyone else from the audience has a question. So that's all really helpful. So now let's say that we are in a condition where there's scarce capability, whether that's, scarce transmission capabilities, scarce energy, so generation or load reduction capability to try and balance the generational load demands. Within your areas, whether that's geographic or functional, whichever you want to take it, how does your area prioritize access to the transmission system between the types of customers we've been talking about? So your native load customers versus your network customers, interchange customers, and Danny and Chris had asked you to kind of think a little bit about how WEIM transfers kind of fit in to the overall from that perspective as well. If you would touch on that, that'd be great. So with that in mind, any of the panelists want to provide some context for how your area kind of manages the scarce resources on the transmissions access side? Take it away, Kelsey. Oh, you're on mute, Kelsey. Unmute.
Thanks.
Gotcha.
As much as we try to complicate it sometimes, at least in the OAT world, it is pretty straightforward, right? So the legacy tools that we have as a BA and transmission owner operator allow you to go into a segment of transmission that is congested and view exactly what reservations are on that transmission. And they are very clearly, display the product that was purchased, whether that is firm, non-firm, network firm. And it's a numbered system with 7 being the highest and 1 being the lowest. And so for those transactions, it is very straightforward. There's always a time element here. So if you have contingency analysis, your tool running, and well, it's always running, but if that is showing a real-time condition that you need to take care of right away, then curtailing transmission and energy schedules is not going to get you a solution fast enough. So you might need to curtail things, including load or generation temporarily, and then be able to hop back on and try to take care of it like the very formal and most appropriate way. But the numbering system really makes it clear. So you're able to look at all the transmission reservations and say, these ones, usually in the case of P&M anyway, most of them have the same reservation priority, which is the 7, which is firm. So then you're going to give your merchant reservation the same priority as a point-to-point customer or a network firm customer with a priority 7, and you will curtail them pro rata. The interesting thing to me is what to do with the EIM transfers. And again, with the timing, you might have to temporarily limit your exports with an ETSR limitation or freeze them, but that's not in your best interest for the long term because the market can, provide through pricing separation with your LMPs, it's going to help you fix your congestion issue if you allow it to run uninterrupted. So there might be a temporary fix with restricting ETSRs and WEIM transfers, but you really should be allowing the market to help you with counterflows and less congestion in the congested way via price separation LMPs and generation redispatches. And if it's not working, there is the tool that EIM participants have, which is within BAYOP, and that's transmission conformance. So you can compare what the market thinks your congestion is on a flow gate with what you're actually seeing on your SCADA system. And if they're not matching, if the market's a little bit behind, you can quickly inform the market of your congestion using transmission conformance And that should result in, a quicker bit of generation dispatch that will help you.
That was really helpful. I have one follow-up question. You mentioned the way that you prioritize your merchant versus your point-to-point customers that are on the same priority level, 7F. Can you describe what about how your treatment for network customers might be different, or is that also the same?
So the network, I'm looking at the priority list right here published. So there are some intricacies with grandfathered agreements, like pre-OAT stuff, and that gets a little bit more complicated. But for the most part, the network customers are also defined on the OAT priority lists, and those are 7s, so they would be curtailed pro rata with our own merchant schedules. Everyone kind of equal curtailments as time allows.
And is that the same if it's primary versus secondary network, or do you treat them all in the same priority level?
I'm gonna have to look more. So secondary network is a lower priority. So unless it's some sort of pre-OAT thing, we'd really follow our list here. It's straightforward with the OAT transactions. It just is, there's just such a time component that by the time if this is an emergency or forced outage as a triggering event, you're really going to have to be doing this kind of after you've fixed the immediate problem.
That's helpful. And did we hear you correctly that immediate action would really be to try to reduce, kind of change your your participation in EIM?
Well, maybe not. So to quickly, a lot of times if you're curtailing transmission, curtailing ATC or curtailing tags, there's no guarantee that tag is being seen by an operator who will immediately change a generation output. And that's the benefit of the EIM tools, right? It's actually connected to generation dispatch signals. A lot of times your tag curtailment will be seen manually by some operator in some control room, and they'll have to manually adjust some output associated with that tag with phone calls. So you can't rely on that in real time if you're actually physically overloading a system element. You need to go straight to the source, which would be the generation or the load. So anything that's contributing to an overload, a system operation limit overload, or an RTCA N-1 overload, you're going to need to go straight to the generation or the load and curtail there, and then come back and try to fix it with ATC and energy tag adjustments after that.
Thank you. Anyone else on the panel want to chime in?
Yeah, I'd say Kelsey nailed it. I mean, ISO operates really similar. We have the ability to do pro rata curtailments also. We don't like doing that. If it's mid-hour and we lose an intertie or a derate on an intertie and we're overscheduled, we're going to have to do curtailments, real-time curtailments. Like Kelsey said, that frequently involves a phone call to the other participants, make sure they see the tag and accept it and all that stuff. Our first line of defense, hopefully, is using the market. We have an operator, a desk, that their sole job is mitigation desk. We have a lot of congestion on our system. Days like today, they probably have a dozen different SOL overloads they're dealing with constantly. And the market runs off a forward-looking state estimated solution, so there's always going to be some error in there. And so that job I'm talking about is frequently doing a limit conformance, changing the limits in the market to line them up with reality and get gen commitments, to get startups and shutdowns, to get EIM, ETSR transfers, even hourly. We can also conform in the hourly HASP market to get favorable interties for different constraints. I think Kelsey mentioned earlier how kind of efficient the market is at redispatching gen. And that's 100% true. When you, if you look on the ISO system, like at path 15 or path 26, there's hundreds, if not thousands, of generating resources on each side of those interfaces. And the market can dispatch all of those in 5 to 10 minutes. Whereas an operator, that's going to take an operator forever to make phone calls and to manually redispatch resources like that. So I guess to sum up, our first line of defense is absolutely the market conformance to deal with congestion, overloads, forced outages. And if there's an intertie, if we lose like a path 66 line, a COI line, for example, we get the new limits, the new study limits into our ETCC calculator. It goes into the market, and the market, hopefully on the next HASP run, should honor those and adjust schedules, adjust imports automatically. So
that's very helpful. Thanks, Chris. Anyone else want to chime in? Sorry, operator,
you might be on mute.
I was. Can we look to see if there's any hands raised if anyone else would like to ask questions of the panelists?
Yes, we do have another hand raised here. I'll go ahead and open that line.
Hey, thanks. This is Dan Williams from Customized Energy Solutions. Can you hear me okay?
Sound great. Hi, Dan.
Yeah, thanks. A question, I think, for Chris and then maybe also for Danny, and that's around the diesel and backup generators in California. You've seen some studies came out in 2021 saying there's around like 12 gigawatts of those type of resources in the Bay Area, South Coast area, with that number likely to grow under the governor's recent work for handling emergencies. I'm just curious how CAISO deals with those generators when it comes to forecasting. Do they get picked up just in the flex alerts? Is there another way that you're kind of incorporating those into the data that we see when we're looking at like today's outlook and other things that are being published? Also, maybe if how you take that into account for congestion management, any ways that it impacts like setting gas burn constraints, those sorts of emergency, kind of pre-emergency operational things. And then for Danny, probably is CAISO looking at doing anything to incorporate those resources into wholesale market pricing so we can make sure that some of those things that you talked about of getting the right price are being influenced by all the generators on the system that are helping meet the emergencies.
Danny, I can go first because my answer will be quick probably.
Sure.
Dan, a lot of those, you're talking about backup diesel generators on the distribution side and stuff like that. That, unfortunately, right now, today, is very much like a black box for us. If it's outside any of the ELRP program, any of the emergency programs that are in place right now, those we do get a heads up on what's going to be coming for tomorrow or today. But if it's outside that, I don't know it until it hits our ACE. So that's my answer.
I can follow up on that, Chris. So completely agree that this is a challenge, Dan. I think this is one of the items that we're trying to tackle through that price formation enhancements initiative. We want to make sure that when these backup resources, which may not be part of our dispatch, are actually utilized, we're not suppressing prices and basically helping with one hand and hurting with the other. So whether it comes in the form of triggering some type of administrative price when these have been triggered, or figuring out if ahead of time we can better model these in the load forecasts that are being used in our market run, I think all options are on the table, but that's one of our primary objectives this fall as part of that policy effort, is to really figure out how to get a handle on those and make sure that they're well coordinated with running a market.
Okay, great. And so, Chris, I guess what I heard in that was just that for where we are today in this current situation, those sorts of things like switching ships over to port power or pulling them off of port power, I should say, and go in the opposite direction. Those sorts of things just kind of show up in the container of flex alert response that you're having to deal with, kind of the uncertainty of where the load forecast is going to come in, not something you have a line of sight to.
Yeah,
okay.
The last 2 years of flex alerts and EEA declarations we've had, it's been, I hate to say it, but it's been kind of chaotic in real time as far as all these different programs, and like you're talking about the Navy unplugging ships and all these different things. They just kind of come at us and they just roll with it.
Thanks, Dan. That's great. Dan, do you have any follow-up questions, or are you good to go? Okay, Dan. Are there any other questions?
It looks like we have no additional questions right now.
Sounds great. Is there, before I turn over to Vijay, do you have a question, or can I ask the panelists for one last?
No, I think a big picture question around demand response, but it can wait. So please go. It's not important.
This is the right time, because that Dan's question was about demand response. So please take it away.
Okay. So mainly it's a question for the market participants who have assets that you're dispatching and managing. So I'm not trying to ignore Energy Hub. I got it. You guys have good services and products, but mainly for APS and P&M, you were quite impacted. We won't deny and hide. It's a known fact with the August 2020 summer outages, and you've highlighted that in many public forums. There's also a genuine concern across utilities outside CalISO, how you leverage and manage resources when you're not part of a full organized market. So what are your big picture thoughts on leveraging demand response in a very explicit way from an economic value perspective? To give a case in point, on August 16, 2020, CalISO was able to bring 7,000 megawatts in demand response to play. So if you are hypothetically part of a future market construct, how do you see demand response playing a role in your stress condition situation, whatever your definitions be of stress conditions?
Was that question for me?
Yeah, it was for APS and P&M.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
From a user perspective, how do you look at demand response truly playing a role, and if not, what are your challenges leveraging it?
So on the marketing end, I'm actually not our demand response expert, but I mean I can speak in very general terms.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So I mean, ultimately, we would like it to be, so our demand response, we would like it to be kind of able to be a resource that is utilized within the market. I don't think we're there yet, but that would be a future goal and something we would like to see, and especially as our demand response programs grow and our customer engagement programs grow.
And can I catch that actually and ask Danny? I know we're running over a couple minutes, but I have a follow-up that I'd like to ask you from what Jessica said. Can you just explain briefly for the audience within the EIM how demand response programs, how you set it up so that they could be reflected in kind of in the market? Can you explain that quickly?
Yeah, thanks, Kathleen. So there's 3 general ways demand response can participate in the WEIM. We have 2 different resource models, the PDR and RDRR models, that allow demand response to explicitly participate on the resource supply side within the WEIM. So from a WEIM-BA perspective, those could be part of your base schedule, would be planned utilization or bids to utilize those DR programs. Recognizing that not all the demand response programs under the different regulatory authorities meet the metering and telemetry requirements of those 2 resource models, we last year made a change to allow WEIM BAAs to represent expected demand response usage as a load offset in the forecast that you're tested against in the base schedule. So to the extent that you would plan to utilize a DR program in the upcoming hour, you could reduce your load by that much and then participate clearing economic transfers in the WEIM for the remainder of your load. I hope that helps, Kathleen.
That does. Brady, do you want to add anything?
No, I think we're finally getting to the point where the resource is big enough to be meaningful to do that, right? So I think, like, to Danny's point, if they're non-participating resources today for the most part, but we've got hundreds of megawatts of DR programs in different BAAs scattered throughout the West. I think I've just started to talk to our utility clients about how to monetize those, and appreciate all the work that went into the resource efficiency changes that allowed for BAAs to take those into account in their forecasts. But I'm curious, is it just it sort of lowers the forecast and therefore the amount of load that you have left to kind of deal with in your capacity tests or flexible ramping tests or whatever evaluations there are? Are there other ways we should be thinking about pulling more? Like, what else could we do to pull more resources into that or create the incentive that isn't just sort of like avoided cost of ETSR transactions, but is more of a pull factor to getting? Yeah.
I to the extent possible, I think we would want DR to participate as a supply side resource and participate through bidding into the market. I think the next step would be figuring out what are the metering and telemetry requirements that different or what is the metering and telemetry reality for different WEIM BAAs, and then figuring out how to square that with the existing resource models to let them potentially participate.
That's really helpful, and I'll just quickly connect a couple dots and see, Brady, if you have a reaction to this. So one of the challenges on the DR and DER side is a minimum capacity requirements. The telemetry and metering aspect is much more feasible for like a DER, but then we get into questions about, well, what kind of aggregation of individual DERs, or even, let's use that scenario, can be combined to get to the minimum size requirement. Do either of you? So I just wanted to note that, kind of connect some of the challenges between the DER providers trying to provide this service and the market once a certain level of transparency. And I think that's one of the bigger issues in this space. Any responses?
I completely agree. Oh, yeah. Well, tell me if you agree, Danny. Like, what I think the observation from the DER side, whether it's sort of project developers and or market participants from the traditional CNI aggregator folks like C-Power and NLX and Voltus and Rodan and Centrica, and the list goes on, in wanting to kind of leverage the export capability of DER, haven't taken up the DER participation model as it exists today, but have the telemetry to be able to do so. It's been more of like, is the evaluation of RA capacity option there? No. So binary, like, we're not going to do this. We're going to focus on DR. We're going to be capped at load, and we're just going to do DR, right? But I think we haven't even gotten to the point at which some of those issues have been surfaced because we're not actually really utilizing the full DER participation model just yet. So hopefully that changes with the 22-22 paradigm.
Yeah, I agree with that concern. That there's a capacity revenue stream and an energy market revenue stream that each participating entity has to make decisions on, and I can see that as being a current barrier to entry. Beyond that, I'm not super tuned in with the RA side of the Cal ISO MIP shop.
Yeah, I can connect that dot too. So DER aggregation model has not been eligible for an RA contract, which has been one of the bigger challenges in this space. I will note that this is an ongoing topic of discussion. There are DER proceedings and efforts going on. There's an action plan on California state side to focus on DER. And so I think that this is an evolving space, and we're going to be having, speaking of those non-discretionary initiatives that Jillian was talking about, more non-discretionary initiatives having to focus on it as the programs from the CPUC and the CEC kind of evolve and change their rules and kind of their vision for how DER should penetrate the California system. That's very California focused, but I do believe there's also efforts in other parts of the West. Does that kind of track, Kelsey and Jessica, kind of your experience in your areas? Is that the DER conversation is a big part of kind of evolving new policy discussions? On the DER topic, I did want to connect one more dot. So Danny, you mentioned how the load for, this reduction, the EIM entities can provide this load reduction amount. Let's assume those are largely, let's say that's utility programs. In the CAISO space, the CAISO BAA, for programs that are not on the supply side, so not PDR, not RDRR, let's talk utility programs, let's talk the emergency programs, ELRP, which are kind of more state program, or even Flex Alert, but utility programs, does the CAISO allow for that type of DR information to be provided into the load forecast CAISO manages?
I believe that's part of the process our forecasting team currently runs. We do have some level of coordination with expected more emergency type DR usage. I'm not the expert on that. We'd need to get someone from our forecasting team here to talk about it, but I believe that we do receive that information to some level, and at some level are able to incorporate it.
Yeah, and Chris?
Yeah, I think they do get some indication of how much DR came off or responded, and our forecasting team takes it out of the historical record so that subsequent forecasts don't assume that DR is going to be there.
Is it fair to say there's a bit of a time lag where it's more the event occurs, it's capturing the drop and is trying to feed that information back in rather than perspective?
Yeah.
Okay, that's really helpful.
I think it's a time lag, and I think it might even be more complicated than that, Kathleen, because we have kind of a historic base. We have kind of a persistence forecast that's using like historic observations with upcoming expected conditions to derive a forecast. And then we also just have kind of a forward-looking forecast. So when you start removing components of like the persistence forecast, like the accuracy can change. There's accuracy trade-offs depending upon which forecast our forecasting group uses. So they carefully consider, I guess, the magnitude of these programs, which then determines how they're best able to derive the most accurate forecast given the expected conditions. Because there's a point where if the program's small enough, just making reductions to a forecast on a forward-looking basis, not considering the historic changes, could actually be less accurate than considering historic changes with small DR that has actually come off. So it's both an art and a science for that team.
That's super helpful. I did hear several themes about forecasting across our conversation today, so maybe that's something that, let's put that in the parking lot and we can consider that for a future discussion if we want to get into more details on forecasting, both DR and energy. Vijay, can I ask you to see if there's any other questions and wrap us up?
Sure. If there's any burning last minute question, please let Marvin know and we can hear from you. Otherwise, I do want to thank Kathleen first and Josh for setting this panel up, and to the speakers who came on today. Does somebody have any urgent burning question, please?
I don't see anything at this time.
Okay, thank you. Well, this was a very good RIF meeting. I want to thank everybody who was involved in setting this meeting up, and a very timely discussion of stress conditions from the different angles, including the market operator perspective. So thanks to CalISO staff as well. And Kathleen, big thank you to you. I know you took this on as an initiative to help out, so thank you for that. Two announcements. One, for those who may not have joined the call at the beginning, we have the fourth and the final RIF meeting for the year on November 8th. Thank you, from 1 to 5 p.m. at the Sacramento Convention Center. Please do register now. It'll help us get a sense of not just accommodation, which we can actually manage pretty well, but we will also be preceding the CalISO Symposium. For those who are not aware, you can also go to the CalISO website, and they should have details on their symposium on the 9th through 10th. I also want to share the good news that we will have the CalISO President CEO, Elliot Mainzer, and Rob Kanzioka, the chair of the Western EIM governing body, both attending and being able to present some perspectives of their own. I have some ideas of my own, which I have to share with the RIF liaisons for some of the panel discussion, 1 or 2 topics. One could be a retrospect on EDAM and what we've learned from this year, but another could be a trending EIM specific discussion item that we may want to discuss, or possibly the governance initiative that will be in its final phases by then. If anybody who's on this call has any ideas or interest for what you would like the RIF to deliberate, please look to the RIF website and contact your respective sector liaisons, or just email me directly as well. Then I can communicate the message back to the larger RIF liaison community. And the only other update I wish to bring to your notice is CalISO has their EDAM stakeholder meetings next week, and there's also an active discussion that's taking place in the industry forums like eSig around market participations and how a range of innovative technologies can be harnessed. So just an FYI as a public interest message around the eSig work that can be very valuable to bring to the table here. With that, I have nothing more to add. If any of the RIF liaisons, do you have anything you wish to add or give a comment to the group, please? Okay, hearing none. For lack of formal procedures, I just offer to have this meeting adjourned. And thank you all for attending our 3rd public meeting for the year. Thank you all.
Thank you all.
That concludes our conference. Thank you for using Event Services. You may now disconnect.
Thank you, Marvin, for your help.
Thank you.